Chapter 57:12. Who the hell are you? When Feng Mo saw this, he was also astonished. Kong Shinmu was quite capable to be able to find the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance in the Scarlet Flame Qilin. However, with Jiang Shenwu's current strength, it was simply impossible for him to destroy this drop of bloodline inheritance. Even Cruel might not be able to do it, let alone Kong Shinmu. For Kong Shinmu, it was impossible for him to destroy the bloodline inheritance. However, the truth was that the bloodline inheritance was indeed gone. It was as if it had disappeared into thin air. He could no longer sense any aura. How could Kong Shinmu destroy the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance? Feng Mo seemed to have gone mad. He used all his skills to capture Kong Shinmu. His moves were ruthless, but he had a certain degree of propriety. Clearly, he didn't want to kill Kong Shinmu. Instead, he wanted to capture Kong Shinmu alive. Facing Feng Mo, who was much stronger than him, Kong Shinmu tried his best to dodge. You have the ability to destroy the bloodline inheritance, but you don't dare to fight me? Feng Mo's words were full of contempt. Isn't that obvious? With my current cultivation, wouldn't I be courting death if I fought you? Kong Shinmu glanced at Feng Mo strangely. After a fierce battle, Feng Mo was finally willing to leave the Black Shadow. When he saw his appearance, Kong Shinmu was surprised. Feng Mo's true appearance was like a skeleton with a layer of skin. Coupled with the Black Death aura around him, he didn't look like a normal person at all. Feng Mo didn't listen to Kong Shinmu. He didn't think much of Kong Shinmu from the start. He also knew that Kong Shinmu couldn't destroy the bloodline inheritance. However, the truth was that Kong Shinmu had indeed destroyed the bloodline inheritance. Otherwise, he would have died in the Scarlet Flame Qilin's flames. Such a contradictory answer could only lead Feng Mo to guess that Kong Shinmu had a second identity that no one knew about, or that he had a heaven-defying magic treasure. Are you playing dumb with me? Feng Mo sneered. It doesn't matter. Wait until I bring you back to the Wuji Pavilion, then you can slowly pretend. Hearing the words Wuji Pavilion, Kong Shinmu's heart skipped a beat. With your ability of all places, why did you have to go to the Wuji Pavilion? As soon as Cruel said that, he rushed forward and blocked Feng Mo's attack. Aren't we the same? Feng Mo immediately retorted. Didn't you become that brat's lackey? Do you think your status is higher than mine? You guys are different, Kong Shinmu explained. I treat him as a partner. Kong Shinmu did not care what kind of status he had in Cruel's heart, but Kong Shinmu firmly believed that all living beings who had signed contracts with the 8 gods astrolabe were his companions. Cruel did not say anything. Feng Mo laughed mockingly. Partner? What was a partner? Can it become stronger? As Feng Mo laughed, waves of grey aura spread out from his body. Then, his actions suddenly became stiff. At this moment, Feng Mo's attack suddenly became stronger. Kong Shinmu felt that Feng Mo's attack was several times stronger than before. What confused Kong Shinmu the most was that while Feng Mo's attack became stronger, his aura changed as well. Those eyes that were full of mockery instantly turned into a dead void. It was as though he was a different person. Get out of the way, Cruel said calmly. Kong Shinmu responded and quickly moved back. 8 gods astrolabe, Cruel added. Kong Shinmu took out the 8 gods astrolabe. On the 8 gods astrolabe, the contract mark that belonged to Cruel was flashing continuously. However, what Kong Shinmu did not expect was that there was another mark that was flashing not far away from this mark. Kong Shinmu seemed to have thought of something as he raised his head and looked at Feng Mo. Feng Mo seemed to have sensed something as he rushed toward Kong Shinmu. His intention was to aim at the 8 gods astrolabe in Kong Shinmu's hand. This action caused a bold idea to emerge in Jiang Shenwu's mind. Feng Mo might have signed a contract with the 8 gods astrolabe. He tried to sense the flickering imprint, but he couldn't find anything for a while. The 8 gods astrolabe was not complete and he was not strong enough. He could not do it for now. Infuse your power into the 8 gods astrolabe. Cruel glanced at the 8 gods astrolabe in Kong Shinmu's hand and said. Kong Shinmu had already infused his power, but the 8 gods astrolabe did not have much of a reaction. Since Cruel said so, Kong Shinmu did as he was told. He gathered his soul and consciousness and infused it into the 8 gods astrolabe. Now, Kong Shinmu's soul and consciousness not only contained the power of the supreme holy ice realm but also the power of the seal. With the addition of these two powers, Kong Shinmu's soul and consciousness were not disturbed at all and directly entered the eight gods' astrolabe. After infusing his power, Kong Shinmu sensed the origin of the mark. That mark was indeed the contract mark between Feng Mo and the eight gods' astrolabe. The mark was still there, which meant that the contract between the two was still there. Kong Shinmu controlled the eight gods' astrolabe and wanted to control Feng Mo. When he did so, he suddenly sensed a chilling aura coming out from within, heading straight for his sea of consciousness. It was so fast that it quickly went beyond the range of the supreme holy ice realm and invaded his soul and consciousness. After this strange power entered Kong Shinmu's soul and consciousness, it separated the power of the supreme holy ice realm from his soul and consciousness. It gradually sank into his soul and consciousness. Seal. Kong Shinmu only had time to awaken the seal. Kong Shinmu only had a superficial understanding of the power of the seal. At this point, he had to rely on the power of the seal. After awakening the seal, the engravings of the seal shattered inch by inch and then formed a dense array of runes, which intertwined and danced with each other. The moment these runes danced, Kong Shinmu only felt that he had a certain degree of control of the space around him. He had a feeling that as long as his mind moved, the space would distort, or shatter, or achieve the purpose of transmission. This was indeed the star map lock core, which was the power of the seal. These runes of the seal danced for a while and then fell into Kong Shinmu's soul and consciousness. At this moment, Kong Shinmu had a better understanding of space. These runes in the seal were rules? Whether they were rules or not, Kong Shinmu had completely absorbed the seal. At this time, his soul and consciousness became stronger again. The strange power that fell into his soul and consciousness was quickly found by Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu originally thought that this was the power of the seal of Feng Mo's contract. At this time, he found that this was the soul and consciousness of a cultivator. The reason why Feng Mo seemed to have become a different person was because Feng Mo was controlled by a mysterious cultivator. The controlling technique was similar to the puppet technique. Chapter 57:13. Feng Mo was being controlled by the supreme puppet technique. With a thought, Kong Shinmu controlled the devouring power to devour the supreme puppet technique that had invaded his mind, consciousness, and sea of consciousness. After devouring the supreme puppet technique, Kong Shinmu sensed the supreme puppet technique. The supreme puppet technique was a kind of supreme divine power that used one's mind and consciousness to control. In a way, the supreme puppet technique was similar to the power of the soul. Kong Shinmu had long mastered the power of the soul. At this time, it was not difficult for him to use the supreme puppet technique. Soon, he comprehended the essence of the supreme puppet technique. Although the supreme puppet technique that had invaded his mind and sea of consciousness was only a small part of it. Fortunately, this supreme puppet technique was pure divine power and did not contain any other impure power. The more supreme puppet technique he devoured, the more power he would have after refining it. With the strength of Kong Shinmu's mind and consciousness, it was not difficult for him to master another kind of divine power. Although the supreme puppet technique he devoured was very small, fortunately, the supreme puppet technique could be used together with the power of the soul. This supreme puppet technique was enough. The cultivator controlling Feng Mo quickly realized that Kong Shinmu had devoured his supreme puppet technique. Once again, he released the powerful supreme puppet technique to control Feng Mo, who had been standing motionless in midair, suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu had already absorbed the power of the Madra and grasped the method of using it. The instant Jiang Shenwu realized that Feng Mo had appeared behind him, he moved to Feng Mo's side with a thought and sent a backhand slap at Feng Mo. His reaction was very fast, and the supreme dragon martial technique he used was also very powerful. However, Kong Shinmu did not manage to slap Feng Mo away. Feng Mo seized the opportunity to grab Kong Shinmu's collar. Kong Shinmu could clearly see Feng Mo's every move. The moment Feng Mo grabbed his collar, he escaped into space. Feng Mo's hand gesture missed. Kong Shinmu was right in front of Feng Mo. Feng Mo seemed to have grabbed Kong Shinmu's collar. But in reality, Feng Mo's hand gesture missed. This scene was witnessed by Cruel, and he couldn't help but feel surprised. From his point of view, Kong Shinmu was just a mere supreme divine power level 8 cultivator. Although Xiao Chen had the extreme 10-directional demonic seal and the 8-god star plate, his cultivation was not that great. Whether he could keep these Dharma treasures would depend on his luck. Treasures were important to cultivators, but they only played a supporting role. The true experts were those whose own strength was enough to dominate the world. But now, Cruel's opinion of Jiang Xinwu had changed. Cruel knew that Jiang Xinwu had already obtained the star map core-locking Madra. Initially, he had thought that Jiang Xinwu only possessed it temporarily. Little did he expect that Jiang Xinwu had already absorbed the Madra. Fong 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 fong. Ja. Fong 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 supreme seal je supreme fong supreme fong. The Dharma seal was an existence that was close to the rules. That was something that nomological cultivators who had stepped into the gate of the rule could cultivate nomological power through their own hard work and then refine and condense it. At this time, Kong Xinmu, who was only a supreme master, had already absorbed the seal. The seal of the star map lock was mainly the power of space. From the looks of it, Kong Xinmu seemed to have mastered a certain amount of space rule power. Even though the demon sealing hand seal had missed, it did not give up. Instead, he launched another attack. Throughout the entire process, Feng Mo appeared extremely calm. It was obvious that after being controlled by the supreme puppet technique, Feng Mo's actions were completely at the mercy of others. With the power of the seal, Jiang Xinwu was not affected by the demon sealing power. He held the 8-god star plate in his hand and tried to control the contract mark that belonged to the demon sealing seal. A few breaths later, the contract mark lit up. Logically speaking, as long as he could contact the contract imprint, he would be able to control the demon sealing seal. Of course, the control he was talking about was different from the supreme puppet technique. Instead, he was talking about making the demon sealer obey his orders. Seeing that the demon sealing seal had stopped attacking, his entire body was suddenly wrapped in layers of gray light. Following that, Kong Xinmu lost contact with the contract mark. The gray light wrapped around the demon sealing seal suddenly fell onto the 8-god star plate and entered the demon sealing seal's contract mark. The demon sealing seal's contract mark immediately dimmed. No matter how hard Kong Xinmu tried to summon it, the contract mark did not light up. At the same time, the demon sealing seal attacked again. Kong Xinmu could clearly sense that this power was much weaker than the power that the demon sealing seal had displayed a few breaths ago. Relying on his mastery of the seal, Kong Xinmu skillfully used space rule power and quickly repelled the demon sealing seal. What happened to you? The demon sealing seal looked at Kong Xinmu in disbelief. In just a few short rounds, how did Kong Xinmu's strength skyrocket so much? After the demon sealing seal asked this question, he seemed to have thought of something and did not ask any more. Following that, the demon sealing seal caught a glimpse of the 8-god star plate. He seemed to be very afraid of the 8-god star plate and did not stay any longer. He turned and dashed to the side, his figure quickly hiding in the void. Even though Kong Xinmu had mastered the seal, he could not sense any traces of the demon sealing seal. Seeing that the demon sealing seal had left, Cruel also planned to return. Thank you so much. Jiang Xinwu thanked Cruel from the bottom of his heart. He is one of the 4 great corpse ancestor clans in the other world, the clan leader of the Sea clan, Cruel said calmly. The 4 great corpse ancestor clans, Kong Xinmu had heard of them before. The first time he heard of the 4 great corpse ancestor clans was through Lang Zhonghong's records. He did not expect to meet one of the 4 great corpse ancestor clans today. You have offended him. You won't have it easy. Cruel glanced at Kong Xinmu and disappeared. On the 8-god star plate, the contract mark that belonged to Cruel also dimmed. Kong Xinmu was helpless. No matter what, Cruel had a contract relationship with him. Cruel really didn't give him any face. After Cruel left, Kong Xinmu did not stay and left this place. There was one thing he was sure of. The demon sealing seal knew that he was controlled by the supreme puppet technique. Moreover, he should know the cultivator who used the supreme puppet technique. The demon sealing seal was brought here by Gu Feng. Then, the cultivator who used the supreme puppet technique was from the everlasting pavilion. When Haifan forced him into a dead end and Kong Xinmu counterattacked, Kong Xinmu already knew that he and the everlasting pavilion were destined to be mortal enemies. It was no longer important whether the cultivator who cultivated the supreme puppet technique was from the everlasting pavilion or not. Kong Xinmu left this place. Although he knew that Gu Feng could not be Senior Mo Ye's opponent, Gu Feng was from the everlasting pavilion. He could not be sure how many people from the everlasting pavilion came to the secret realm this time. After walking out of this place, Kong Xinmu saw Mo Ye. Mo Ye looked a little hurried. Senior. Kong Shinmu hurried over to Emoya.
Kong Shinmu.
Seeing Kong Shinmu, Emoya finally heaved a sigh of relief.
Senior, are you okay?
Kong Shinmu looked at Emoya from head to toe. Emoya was not injured, but her breathing was a little chaotic. I'm fine. But you, that Gufeng did not cause trouble for you, right? Emoya also looked at Kong Shinmu.
After a round of inspection, Emoya's eyes lit up.
Senior, look at this. Chapter 57:14. This is the bloodstain? Where did you get it? Emoya had experienced the power of the bloodstain. It was very strong. Its weakness was that it relied too much on the power of the Crimson Flame Chelan's bloodline. Without the power of the Crimson Flame Chelan's bloodline, it was just an ordinary Dharma artifact. Even so, Emoya was still surprised to see the bloodstain in Kong Shinmu's hand. When Emoya touched the bloodstain, she couldn't feel any power of the Crimson Flame Chelan's bloodline, not even Gufeng's aura.
Could it be? Emoya immediately understood and her expression froze.
Yes.
Kong Shinmu understood what Emoya was trying to say and nodded.
No wonder I can see that your cultivation has improved a lot. Emoya's beautiful eyes curved slightly as she said softly. Compared to the 8-god star plate, the bloodstain doesn't have much collection value. Kong Shinmu looked at the bloodstain and wondered if he should throw it away.
Emoya looked at the bloodstain again and said gently, "The quality of the bloodstain is indeed ordinary, but the material is a bit special.
You should keep it first." I'll listen to you, Senior. Kong Shinmu put the bloodstain away. Kong Shinmu roughly told Emoya what had happened to him during this period of time. And Emoya finally understood. At that time, she was stopped by Dan Yuanfei, which gave Gufeng the opportunity to escape. She knew that Gufeng would definitely come to find Kong Shinmu, so she didn't continue fighting with Dan Yuanfei and came here as soon as possible. Speaking of which, that grand senior brother of the Everlasting Pavilion has some tricks up his sleeve. Emoya was worried about Kong Shinmu and couldn't defeat Dan Yuanfei quickly, so she could only use her own spells to get rid of Dan Yuanfei. The people of the Everlasting Pavilion are quite arrogant, Kong Shinmu said. First it was Hai Fan, then Gufeng, then that grand senior brother. Now we have a grudge with the Everlasting Pavilion. Kong Shinmu's tone was a bit helpless. How can it be smooth sailing on the path of cultivation for us cultivators? To put it bluntly, we advance by stepping on the bodies of the weak. Kong Shinmu naturally understood this as well.
Since the enmity had already been established, he would naturally avoid dealing with the people of the Everlasting Pavilion.
The two of them didn't stay any longer. They decided to look for Tang Xiaoyu first before going to the cave.
According to the time that had passed, all the cultivators who had entered the secret realm had basically found the cave abode where the star map lock was located.
Going to the abode now was undoubtedly walking into a trap. In the end, the three of them met at the only ancient ruins in the secret realm. The scene of their encounter was a little awkward. For some unknown reason, Tang Xiaoyu was tied up and trapped in an array formation.
The formation looked like a simple trapping formation, but it was constantly changing, so it was impossible to determine the formation base in a short period of time.
It was precisely because of this that Tang Xiaoyu was unable to escape the trap formation. Senior Mo, Brother Jiang. Tang Xiaoyu, who was busy struggling, raised his head and saw Kong Shinmu and Emoya walking over. I was just about to go look for you.
I didn't expect you to come so soon.
Tang Xiaoyu grinned brightly. If he wasn't tied up, Tang Xiaoyu's words would be quite cool. You were tied up by the Everlasting Pavilion's eldest senior brother? Kong Shinmu asked in confusion. Tang Xiaoyu was tied up by a trapping array, which was Gufeng's technique. However, Gufeng was dead, and all the trapping arrays she set up would disappear. There was only one possibility left. The person who set up the array was the Everlasting Pavilion's eldest senior brother. Yuanfei is no match for me. Tang Xiaoyu curled his lips and said faintly. I was tied up by my eldest senior brother. He still has something to do and will probably come back later. While speaking, Tang Xiaoyu escaped from the trapping array. Since you're all right, then I'm relieved. I'll leave first. See you later. After saying that, Tang Xiaoyu's figure moved and disappeared from the spot. The moment his figure disappeared, Kong Shinmu clearly sensed that the space was being folded 9 times. After not seeing each other for a while,
Tang Xiaoyu's 10,000 origin folding technique had already reached the 9th level. His talent in the 10,000 origin folding technique was indeed extraordinary.
Senior, I've already obtained the star map lock. When the time is right, we can go to the cave abode, Kong Shinmu said frankly. If I remember correctly, the star map lock is actually a space seal, right? Mo Ya's beautiful eyes curved slightly as she said gently. Yes, it's a space seal. Kong Shinmu hesitated for a moment.
I should have grasped a certain level of power.
As soon as he said that, Mo Ya was surprised. A seal was the source of power that a law cultivator would condense when they reached a certain level. Encountering a dermic seal was not a surprising thing, but mastering a dermic seal was enough to shock people. Kong Shinmu was just a supreme superior cultivator, and his supreme divine power was approaching the 10th level. However, the gap between the 8th and 10th level was not something that could be crossed with time. Some cultivators would never be able to cross this gap in their entire lives. Mo Ya's slender jade-like hand pressed between Kong Shinmu's eyebrows and injected her supreme divine power. Kong Shinmu quickly sensed Mo Ya's power. He tried his best not to repel Mo Ya's power. However, when Mo Ya's power reached his soul consciousness, it was devoured by the devouring power. Kong Shinmu instantly felt a little awkward. He hurriedly controlled the devouring power to release this power. Mo Ya examined her soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness for a while before withdrawing her power. On the surface, Kong Shinmu's chi meridians did not change much. In reality, the strength of Kong Shinmu's chi meridians had far surpassed what it was before. Chi meridians determined the strength of this supreme dragon martial technique. With the strength of Kong Shinmu's current chi meridians, the supreme dragon martial technique that he displayed could easily defeat a supreme superior cultivator with level 7 supreme divine power. Just by using the supreme dragon martial technique and not using the supreme divine power, Xiao Chen could easily defeat Xiao Chen. Mo Ya felt that Kong Shinmu's soul consciousness was very strong. It was like an ocean with no end to it, deep and mysterious. Suddenly, Mo Ya's expression froze. Kong Shinmu's aura was not right. Kong Shinmu, how did you deal with the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline power before you obtained the bloodstain? Mo Ya asked. Senior, the reason why the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline power on the bloodstain is because Gu Feng used the replication power. Kong Shinmu said truthfully. Apart from the supreme dark energy and supreme spiritual energy, she also has a duplication power that is comparable to the supreme divine energy. Replication power? Mo Ya's expression froze. I know about the supreme replication power. Mo Ya thought for a while. Originally, the supreme replication power was a type of multiple supreme divine power. However, as the cultivation method changed, some things happened. The current supreme replication power, in a sense, was a single supreme divine power. It was not a natural power, but a single supreme divine power. That person definitely knew about the things that happened between the multiple supreme divine power to a single supreme divine power. Before becoming a single supreme divine power, the corresponding cultivator could still use the supreme replication power. By now, the cultivators of that era would have long stepped into the gate of rules and become nomological cultivators. What was certain was that there were very few cultivators of the supreme replication power in that period, less than 10. From what Mo Ya knew, no one should have grasped the supreme replication power after becoming a single supreme divine power. Gu Feng used the power of replication. It seems to be the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance power, Kong Shinmu said. The Nangong family seems to be in the same spatial domain as the outer realm, but not in the same space-time. Chapter 57-15. Senior, do you know anything about the Nangong family? Kong Shinmu sometimes felt that Senior Mo Ya was like a know-it-all. However, he did learn a lot of things from her that he had never heard of before. My understanding of the Nangong family is the same as our understanding of the Wuji Pavilion and the Tianyuan Palace. It's very one-sided. Mo Ya smiled gently. I only heard that they were once active in the outer realm. I have never heard of their bloodline inheritance, nor did I know that they were related to the Wuji Pavilion. At that time, I met the eldest senior brother of the Tianyuan Palace. When he called Gu Feng, he mentioned the Nangong family. Her duplication ability came from the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance. Kong Shinmu said. Gu Feng eventually used a drop of bloodline to duplicate the Scarlet Flame Qilin. Her devouring ability devoured that drop of bloodline. The Nangong family's bloodline inheritance that was devoured by the devouring ability was finally absorbed by the 7 devouring demon sealing art. This was what Kong Shinmu was afraid of. He didn't know whether it was the 7 devouring demon sealing art or Fengling that absorbed that drop of bloodline. Kong Shinmu could trust the 7 devouring demon sealing art. However, he couldn't trust Fengling. Fengling called himself the spirit of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. What kind of spirit could summon the contract life form of the 8 gods astrolabe? The Nangong family's bloodline inheritance. It seems that we have to make a trip to the outer realm. Emoya focused and said. Kong Shinmu was stunned. He had killed the daughter of the Wuji Pavilion's pavilion master. Wasn't going to the outer realm the same as courting death? Emoya saw the change in Kong Shinmu's expression and couldn't help but smile. Are you scared? I'm scared. I might die. Kong Shinmu resentfully rubbed his nose. Relax. What will come will come. Emoya said softly. Moreover, the secret realm seems to be moving toward the outer realm this time. We should keep a low profile and investigate the Nangong family. Otherwise, placing an unknown bloodline power in your body is also a hidden danger. Emoya's words were not false. They should do so. Kong Shinmu agreed with Moya. The two of them set off toward the Immortal's Cave with the star map lock. Along the way, they could see more and more cultivators. The most obvious ones were the 4 great sects of the outer realm. Kong Shinmu and Emoya had no intention of clashing with the 4 great sects, so they headed straight for their destination. Isn't that guy Kong Shinmu? Who is Kong Shinmu? Previously, when I was in the desolate ancient city, I saw that he had a conflict with Wuji Pavilion's Hai Fan. I thought that Hai Fan had killed him. I never thought that he would actually come here. Some cultivators passing by saw Kong Shinmu and started chatting with him. It was supposed to be an ordinary conversation, but it attracted the attention of the 4 great sections. Especially the people from Wuji Pavilion. The disciples of Wuji Pavilion listened to Yuan Fei's order and gathered together. When they heard Kong Shinmu's name, they all stopped and looked at Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu and Emoya were unmoved and continued to head for their destination. Stop! However, someone shouted at them to stop. It was the people of Wuji Pavilion. The person who spoke was older. He was one of the elders of Wuji Pavilion, Gu Yongfeng. As soon as Gu Yongfeng spoke, the people of Wuji Pavilion surrounded Kong Shinmu and Emoya. The moment the crowd formed an encirclement, a trapping array appeared, sealing off all the space that the two of them could move about. It seemed that Gu Feng was able to use the bloodstains to release array-based spells. It was not because the bloodstains were special, but because the people of Wuji Pavilion all knew array-based spells. Kong Shinmu and Emoya were forced to stop. Although the people of Wuji Pavilion had set up a trap array, Kong Shinmu had mastered the seal. Any array that was related to sealing space could be easily broken by him. Kong Shinmu quickly broke the array that trapped them. Not being bound by the array was Kong Shinmu's guarantee for Emoya's safety. You have the bloodline aura of the red flame Qilin. Gu Yongfeng's turbid eyes locked onto Kong Shinmu. The powerful aura emitted from his body directly oppressed Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu's soul consciousness and seal were combined. Facing Gu Yongfeng's oppressive aura, he was very calm. Where is Feng? Gu Yongfeng was certain that Gu Feng's disappearance had something to do with Kong Shinmu and questioned. The disciples of Wuji Pavilion had already released their supreme divine powers. The moment several supreme divine powers were released, a new array formation formed around Kong Shinmu and Emoya. Moreover, the array formation was slowly changing. Kong Shinmu quickly found the reason why the array formation was changing. It wasn't that the disciples of Wuji Pavilion had many supreme divine powers, but that the new array formation they set up was a derivative array. The core of a derivative array formation was that it would constantly change. Moreover, if the derivative array formation was not activated, it would be very difficult to distinguish what attribute the array formation was. Kong Shinmu only sensed that this was a derivative array formation. As the derivative array continued to expand, Kong Shinmu understood that this was not a simple trap array. It was most likely an offensive attribute array formation. Since it was a derivative array formation, when the array formation was activated, it meant that Kong Shinmu and Emoya were trapped inside. At this time, the derivative array formation had not been activated. Kong Shinmu and Emoya could only remain vigilant. Who is that? Kong Shinmu asked unhurriedly. Stop pretending. You have the bloodline aura of the red flame Qilin on you.
That's the power in Feng'er's bloodline, Gu Yongfeng said coldly. From this posture, he had already determined that Kong Shinmu was the culprit behind Gu Feng's death. Whether he admitted it or not was no longer important.
If I say no, will you let us go? Kong Shinmu asked directly. Gu Yongfeng laughed out loud. Haha, kid. You took our Wuji Pavilion's things. Do you think you can leave the secret realm alive?
Not only Gu Yongfeng, but even the disciples of Wuji Pavilion next to him, and even some of the disciples of other sects who were watching the show, were full of ridicule. Among the 4 major sects of the extraterritorial realm, Wuji Pavilion was famous for being unreasonable. The people of Wuji Pavilion, let alone a wandering cultivator like Kong Shinmu, even the people of the major sects in the extraterritorial realm tried to avoid conflict as much as possible.
Kong Shinmu had long expected Gu Yongfeng to say this.
In other words, no matter what he said, Gu Yongfeng would not let them go, so there was no need to talk nonsense.
Kong Shinmu directly activated a hand seal and used it to quickly find a breakthrough in the derivative array formation. Senior. Kong Shinmu signaled Mo Ya to get closer to the breakthrough.
Kong Shinmu, be careful not to fall into a trap.
Mo Ya's beautiful eyes narrowed. She was somewhat skeptical about the breakthrough in the derivative array formation.
After Mo Ya's reminder, Kong Shinmu suddenly understood.
Chapter 57:16.
What Kong Shinmu thought was the breakthrough was actually the key to activating the derivative formation. Usually, for this kind of derivative formation, the activation of the formation by the caster and the activation of the formation by the trapped person would have different effects.
It was obvious that if Jiang Shenwu and Mo Ya triggered the derivation formation that the Everlasting Pavilion disciples had set up themselves, the two of them would be completely trapped inside.
It's my fault.
Kong Shinmu glanced at the breakthrough he had just found with lingering fear. They haven't activated the formation yet. They must be waiting for us to trigger it ourselves. We just need to avoid the formation base and leave the formation, Mo Ya said.
In just a few breaths, Mo Ya had already figured out the situation of the derivative formation by relying on the power of her cultivation technique.
Senior, I took a look just now. The two of us seem to be surrounded by the formation base. After Kong Shinmu mastered the Dharma seal, he had a certain insight into space-type formations. Although he was not very sure about the location of the formation base, and there were a few that seemed to be the existence of the formation base. In short, these formation bases were surrounding them. Once they used any kind of space-type spell, they would trigger any of the formation bases. Looking at the layout of the formation base, once one of the formation bases was triggered, it would form a chain reaction, and the formation would automatically activate the next formation base. This meant that the two of them were the ones who triggered the formation. This was the result that Gu Yongfeng wanted. Well, we can't use any space-type spell techniques. Mo Ya also noticed this tricky problem. Since they couldn't use space-type spell techniques, they could only rely on their own peerless martial skills to break through. Kong Shinmu's peerless dragon martial skill had only destroyed one of the formation bases. Before he could take a few steps, a new formation base was formed. The new formation base's structure had also changed. If they wanted to destroy it again, they would have to reanalyze the structure of the formation base. It seemed that using peerless martial skills to destroy the formation was also not feasible. The fact that the Everlasting Pavilion's disciples were able to complete an entire derivative formation together meant that their minds and consciousness were connected. They would perfect the formation based on the changes that occurred in the derivative formation, so that the formation could maintain its strength at all times. This was their strength, and it was also their breakthrough point. Kong Shinmu glanced at the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion around him. They were obviously different people, but their current state was surprisingly the same. Especially the breathing, it could be said to be on the same rhythm. There were about a dozen disciples of the Wuji Pavilion present. More than a dozen people were casting a derivation formation at the same time. If one person's soul consciousness was broken, wouldn't the entire derivation formation be destroyed? Kong Shinmu was thinking about this, and Mo Ya was also thinking about the same thing. Of course, this was also a disadvantage that Gu Yongfeng and the others were well aware of. Brat, don't think too much. You won't be able to escape. Come with us obediently so that you won't suffer any physical pain. Gu Yongfeng commanded the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion.
The disciples of the everlasting pavilion chanted and made the same hand gesture. The derivation formation was evolving the formation base in a very orderly manner. Kong Xinmu ignored Gu Yongfeng's sarcasm. Kong Xinmu was familiar with the derivation formation. He had also experienced it personally, so he had a knack for it. The evolution of the derivation formation seemed to be perfectly connected, but Kong Xinmu was still able to grasp the gap in the evolution of the formation. Kong Xinmu condensed the Supreme Dragon Martial skill and took advantage of this gap to rush to the nearest disciple of the Everlasting Pavilion and hit him without hesitation. The disciple didn't even have time to scream, and his body flew out. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. All of this happened so suddenly that even Gu Yongfeng didn't have time to react. Gu Yongfeng was sure that Kong Xinmu couldn't use spatial techniques in the presence of the derivation formation, so he wasn't afraid of Kong Xinmu approaching the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion. Even if Kong Xinmu's movement technique was different from ordinary people, there would still be a certain flaw. However, what Gu Yongfeng didn't expect was that not only was Kong Xinmu's movement technique good, but he also directly repelled a disciple of the Everlasting Pavilion. Seeing that the disciple didn't say anything for a long time, he was afraid that he was dead. That's it. Gu Yongfeng saw through Kong Xinmu's thoughts. Kong Xinmu wanted to break the disciples who had set up the derivation formation one by one so that he could break the derivation formation. Unfortunately, this idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Kong Xinmu ignored Gu Yongfeng and focused all his attention on breaking the formation. Before mastering the derivation formation, Kong Xinmu could only use this method to break the formation. After defeating a disciple of the Everlasting Pavilion, the rest of the disciples instantly adjusted their positions and stabilized the derivation formation. Kong Xinmu had already seen through all of this, so he took advantage of the time when they changed the formation to rush forward again. This time, Kong Xinmu rushed to the side of the Everlasting Pavilion's disciple who was furthest away from him. The moment Kong Xinmu approached, the disciple noticed it. When he was setting up the formation, he had already released his supreme divine power. Therefore, the moment Kong Xinmu approached the disciple, he fell into the encirclement of the supreme divine power. It was a very common supreme divine power, and it was only at the 7th level. Now that Kong Xinmu's supreme divine power had already broken through the 8th level, it was very easy for him to defeat a 7th level supreme divine power. Gu Yongfeng saw it clearly now. Kong Xinmu did not use his movement technique to get close to the disciple, but a spatial technique. Using a spatial technique in my derivation formation? Gu Yongfeng's face was full of sarcasm. He was so surprised that his voice was very hoarse. Aren't you afraid of being trapped in a spatial crack and never coming out? Gu Yongfeng took the initiative to join the derivation formation this time. The disciple of the Everlasting Pavilion that Kong Xinmu defeated just now was the key person in this derivation formation. He could also be compared to the foundation of the derivation formation. Now that one of the foundation had been destroyed, the formation needed a new one. Even if there was no new foundation to replenish it, it should be able to evolve in time so that the formation could operate normally in the corresponding foundation. Gu Yongfeng naturally underestimated Kong Xinmu's ability. Since Kong Xinmu found out that this disciple was the key to the derivation formation, he naturally found out the other key points one by one. When Gu Yongfeng personally entered the derivation formation, Kong Xinmu defeated 2 more disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion in succession. All of this happened in just a breath's time. Even Mo Ya, who only paid attention to Kong Xinmu, could not help but exclaim. After Kong Xinmu comprehended the seal, he awakened the talent of the derivation formation. Mo Ya thought that if there was a chance in the future, she would also let Kong Xinmu learn the derivation formation. Kong Xinmu defeated several disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion one after another, causing the derivation formation to collapse. Although the remaining disciples tried their best to evolve the derivation formation, they could not stop Kong Xinmu's attack. Kong Xinmu took advantage of the victory to chase after the last disciple of the Everlasting Pavilion. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. All the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion who participated in the derivation formation were defeated by Kong Xinmu one by one. Gu Yongfeng's face was gloomy to the extreme. Useless trash. Glancing coldly at the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion who fell to the side, Gu Yongfeng's face was filled with killing intent. Compared to them, you are too weak. Go to hell. After saying that, Gu Yongfeng waved his hand. Chapter 57:17. The moment the black lightning struck, the disciples of the everlasting pavilion who had been knocked down by Kong Shinmu were all turned into ashes. In the eyes of the spectators, this scene did not seem to be strange at all, and they did not have much of a reaction. However, Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya's expressions changed slightly. They did not expect that the everlasting pavilion would treat their defeated disciples like this. Gu Yongfeng's hand gesture did not stop. With a wave of his hand, more black lightning struck down from the sky. Several black lightning bolts covered Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya like a spider web. As the black lightning struck, Kong Shinmu sensed several different supreme divine powers. What a shocking supreme divine power! Mo Ya's beautiful eyes narrowed as she stared at the sweeping black lightning and said in a deep voice, "Yes." Kong Shinmu was stunned. Why did this Gu Yongfeng possess more than 10 types of supreme divine powers? Kong Shinmu was confident that he possessed more than 10 types of supreme divine powers. It was the effect of the devouring power. Most importantly, even if he possessed so many supreme divine powers, he could not comprehend them all in a short period of time. To be precise, there were only 2 types of supreme divine powers that he could actually use. One was the power of the supreme divine fire. This was the first type of supreme divine power that he had comprehended. Now, he had already reached the 8th level and comprehended the power of the supreme realm. Next was the power of the supreme soul. This kind of supreme divine power was obtained through devouring. Currently, it had not improved much and had not comprehended the power of the supreme realm. There was also the power of the supreme sacred earth and the power of the supreme dark steel, which he only understood a little. He had only used a little of the power of the supreme dark steel, and he had not used the power of the supreme sacred earth. This Gu Yongfeng was actually able to use so many supreme divine powers at the same time? Kong Shinmu, let's go. Mo Ya's voice rang in his ears. Kong Shinmu calmed himself down and rushed in the direction that Mo Ya had pointed out. The black thunderbolt was very fast. However, Jiang Shenwu and Mo Ya were even faster. They easily dodged the black thunderbolt's attack. Senior, let's go out. As soon as Kong Shinmu's feet touched the ground, he sensed something strange in this space. Gu Yongfeng was setting up an array. His black lightning made use of more than 10 kinds of supreme divine powers to once again display the derivation formation that Kong Shinmu had just broken. Just as the derivation array formation appeared, Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya had already left this space. It was also at this time that Kong Shinmu found out what was going on with the dozen types of unparalleled godly powers. That was not Gu Yongfeng's supreme divine power, but the supreme divine power of the disciples of the everlasting pavilion that Gu Yongfeng had killed. The moment his black lightning struck, it deprived all the disciples of the everlasting pavilion of their supreme divine power. That was why he was able to create such a large-scale derivative formation all by himself. However, in the end, it was still the power of one person. Although he had the means to set up the formation, the speed at which he set up the formation was much slower. He still couldn't achieve his goal of trapping Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. Seeing that the two of them had left the range of the current formation, Gu Yongfeng simply stopped setting up the formation. He condensed the current formation and took the initiative to activate it. The moment the formation was activated, a black vortex was formed. The black vortex spun fiercely, and a huge suction force came from it, sucking everything around the vortex. Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya were a certain distance away from the vortex, but they could still feel the strong suction force. They tried their best to circulate the power in their whole body to avoid being sucked in. Some of the cultivators around were not paying attention and were sucked into the black vortex. Get out of the way! At this time, a cultivator cried out in alarm. That's the corresponding secret technique of the everlasting pavilion's elders, the thunder vortex. No one knew who said it, but for a moment, the cultivators who were watching suddenly burst into an uproar and started talking about it. All the sects in the outer region knew that each of the elders of the everlasting pavilion of the 4 major sects had a corresponding secret technique. Elder Gu Yongfeng's secret technique was the thunder vortex. The thunder vortex could devour everything within its range. Everything that was devoured by the thunder vortex would be crushed by the power in the thunder vortex. Get out of here if you don't want to die. Gu Yongfeng coldly glanced at the surrounding cultivators and said in an awe-inspiring tone. As soon as he said that, many cultivators retreated. Even so, there were still some cultivators who were directly involved in it. The thunder vortex was still constantly spinning, and at the same time, A huge suction force came from it. The screams of the cultivators who were sucked in could be heard. Kong Shinmu and Emoya also heard what the surrounding cultivators said. The two of them did not stop and rush to the side. However, what they did not expect was that Gu Yongfeng's secret technique, the thunder vortex, could actually move. Instead of saying that the thunder vortex could move, it was more accurate to say that Gu Yongfeng made the thunder vortex cross space. At this time, the thunder vortex had already blocked in front of Kong Shinmu and Emoya. The two of them were already locked by the suction force. Kong Shinmu, I will cover your retreat. Emoya's slender jade-like hands quickly formed a seal. Senior, this is the devouring power. I will cover you. After Kong Shinmu realized that the essence of the thunder vortex was the devouring power, he secretly made a decision in his heart. Emoya already knew what Kong Shinmu was trying to do. Kong Shinmu, you can't. Emoya frowned slightly. No one knew what was in the thunder vortex, and it was very dangerous to be sucked in just like that. Senior, don't worry. Kong Shinmu had made up his mind. Moreover, there was no longer any room for them to make a choice. Kong Shinmu concentrated all his energy around Emoya, and together with Emoya's supreme divine power, he sent Emoya out of the range of the thunder vortex. This also meant that Kong Shinmu had been sucked into the thunder vortex. Emoya, who was far away from the thunder vortex's devouring range, fixed her beautiful eyes on the thunder vortex. Heh, what an infatuated person. Seeing that Kong Shinmu was sacrificing himself in exchange for Emoya's freedom, Gu Yongfeng sneered. None of you can leave. Gu Yongfeng had no intention of letting Emoya go. He controlled the thunder vortex to move again. Emoya roughly understood the movement trajectory of the thunder vortex. Since she relied on Gu Yongfeng's supreme divine power to cross space, the range of space she could cross was very limited. The thunder vortex's devouring power was not omnidirectional, and it still had a certain blind spot. As long as one was in the blind spot of the thunder vortex, one would not be devoured. Just as Emoya was thinking about this, she saw Gu Yongfeng's hand seal change again. At the same time, another thunder vortex appeared on the opposite side of the existing thunder vortex. When the thunder vortex appeared on the opposite side, Emoya clearly felt that the devouring power had suddenly increased. Emoya was forced to move away. Chapter 57:18 Thunderbolt Whirlpool. Kong Shinmu released his black dragon scales. Coupled with the power of the supreme dark steel, he forcefully resisted the tearing force of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool and entered it. Because the power in the center of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool was too concentrated, it formed a narrow space that was not enclosed. However, this narrow space was not safe. Instead, he would be oppressed by the various forces of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool and even by external forces. With the power of the supreme dark steel, the tearing force of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool could not cause any harm to Kong Shinmu. He could even see the corpses of the cultivators that had been sucked in, accompanied by the pungent smell of blood. How strong was the power of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool? The corpses that had been thrown into this space were quickly crushed. In just a few short breaths, other cultivators were sucked in. Kong Shinmu watched as the cultivators that were sucked in instantly disappeared into the surrounding space. The area next to this space was close to the center of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool. According to common sense, this was also the place where the tearing force of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool was the strongest. The center of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool would superimpose the surrounding forces. As the speed of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool increased and as time passed, the pressure in the empty space at the center would only become stronger. The reason why Kong Shinmu took the risk to enter the Thunderbolt Whirlpool was to absorb its power. As one of the secret techniques of Everlasting Pavilion's Gu Yongfeng, the Thunderbolt Whirlpool had the ability to devour. Kong Shinmu also had the ability to devour. If he could obtain the power of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool, then his ability to devour could become a secret technique like the Thunderbolt Whirlpool. Just as he was thinking about how to absorb the power of the Thunderbolt Whirlpool, Kong Shinmu realized that the space around him had suddenly increased. Kong Shinmu was keenly aware of the reason for the sudden increase in space. There was one more Thunderbolt Whirlpool. In other words, Gu Yongfeng had created a mirror Thunderbolt Whirlpool. The two Thunderbolt Whirlpools were opposite each other, but the power they produced was surprisingly the same. With the appearance of the mirror Thunderbolt Whirlpool, more and more cultivators and other things were sucked in. This time, before these cultivators could even get close to the center, they were all smashed to smithereens. The cultivators who were sucked in were mostly at the 3rd or 4th level of supreme divine power. So far, there were no cultivators at the 5th level. In other words, the suction force of Gu Yongfeng's thunder whirlpool could only devour cultivators who were below divine power level 5. If he wanted to absorb more powerful cultivators with supreme divine power, he would need to use a corresponding spell technique to lock onto them. Just now, Gu Yongfeng had used a spell to lock on him and Mo Ya. Kong Xinmu had no idea what kind of spell Gu Yongfeng had cast. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to devour the thunder vortex. Even if there were 2 lightning vortexes, Kong Xinmu still wanted to devour them. Kong Xinmu ignored the cultivators and other things that the lightning whirlpool sucked in from the outside world. As long as Mo Ya was safe, nothing else mattered. Kong Xinmu focused his mind and released his devouring power. The moment the devouring power was released, it began to devour. Kong Xinmu was now in the center of the thunder vortex. After the devouring power was released, it first devoured the power in the center of the thunder vortex. After devouring, the power of the thunder vortex began to disintegrate. After a few breaths, Gu Yongfeng noticed that there was something wrong with the power of the thunder vortex. Humph, it's just an ant struggling before death. Gu Yongfeng immediately guessed that it was Kong Xinmu's trick. Gu Yongfeng had expected that Kong Xinmu would not be devoured by the thunder vortex. After all, if he was swallowed by the thunder vortex, then Kong Xinmu would be too weak. Such a weakling was not worthy of being Feng Er's opponent. The fact that Kong Xinmu could persist in the thunder vortex for so long showed that he had some skills. However, it was a fool's dream to think that he could survive in his thunder vortex. Gu Yongfeng's hand gestures changed a few times, and the spinning speed of the thunder vortex suddenly increased. At the same time, several streams of black aura condensed around him and headed straight for the thunder vortex. This black aura was Gu Yongfeng's supreme divine power. It was the supreme fog power. However, due to the thunderbolt whirlpool of his secret technique, his innate talent had undergone a certain change during the cultivation process. Over time, the color of Gu Yongfeng's talent, fog power, turned black. Later on, when his cultivation base reached the supreme superior level, the supreme mist turned black. Several streams of supreme fog power condensed into the shape of lightning and rushed toward the thunder vortex. Kong Xinmu, who was in the center of the thunder vortex, had already sensed Gu Yongfeng's arrival the moment he released the supreme fog power. As far as Kong Xinmu was concerned, Gu Yongfeng's supreme fog power was at the peak of the 8th level. As long as it was still at the 8th level, he was still far from the gate of law. Without the power of law, Gu Yongfeng was not that difficult to deal with. Kong Xinmu skillfully used the supreme soul power and continued to release his devouring power to devour the thunder vortex. At the same time, Kong Xinmu released the supreme divine flame power to contend with Gu Yongfeng's supreme fog power. The supreme fog power and Kong Xinmu's supreme divine flame power were exactly the opposite. Although they were both in the 8th level, the moment Kong Xinmu released the supreme divine flame power, he also released the supreme divine flame domain. In a breath's time, the supreme divine flame domain had already spread out with Kong Xinmu as the center. Soon, the supreme divine flame domain covered the entire thunder vortex. The moment the supreme divine flame domain covered the entire thunder vortex, it seemed to have reached the boundary and could no longer spread out. Kong Xinmu gathered his soul consciousness and once again released the supreme divine flame domain. This time, the supreme divine flame domain exceeded the range of the thunder vortex. However, no matter what, it could not spread to the range of the thunder vortex. While Kong Xinmu was puzzled, Gu Yongfeng's expression changed greatly. He discovered that his thunder vortex was actually out of control. What was worse was that there was an extremely powerful devouring power that was currently devouring the thunder vortex. In a moment of desperation, Gu Yongfeng also released the supreme divine flame domain. Although his movements were fast, he was still a step too slow. After Kong Xinmu's supreme divine flame domain was released with the help of his soul consciousness, it meant that the devouring power had devoured the thunder vortex. When the devouring power had first devoured the thunder vortex had tried to devour the devouring power. Now that the devouring power had been tempered by the 7 devouring demon sealing art, its strength was incomparable to before. When the thunder vortex began to devour, the devouring power had already shrunk along with the thunder vortex. By the time the thunder vortex retracted, the devouring power had already completely devoured the thunder vortex. After absorbing the power of the thunder vortex, Kong Shinmu clearly felt that the devouring power had undergone a qualitative change. Kong Shinmu circulated his own power and released his thunder vortex. Chapter 57:19. The moment Kong Shinmu released the thunder whirlpool, Gu Yongfeng sensed its existence. However, the conceited Gu Yongfeng did not believe that Kong Shinmu could release the thunder whirlpool. Moreover, the thunder whirlpool was the secret technique of the everlasting pavilion's elder. The successors before him had long since wandered the world, and it had already been several hundred years, perhaps even over 1,000 years since there had been any news of them. It could be said that he was the only one who possessed the thunder whirlpool's secret technique. Gu Yongfeng controlled his supreme divine power and condensed another thunder whirlpool. This was Gu Yongfeng's limit. Gu Yongfeng could release 3 thunder whirlpools at the same time. In other words, on the basis of the 2 mirror thunder whirlpools, he added an outer thunder whirlpool. From the outside, the 3rd thunder whirlpool wrapped around the mirror thunder whirlpool. The moment he released the 3rd thunder whirlpool, Gu Yongfeng instantly noticed that something was wrong. In the mirror thunder whirlpool, the power in the center of the thunder whirlpool was disintegrating. Even with the addition of his supreme divine power, the power in the thunder whirlpool was still rapidly disintegrating. Not long after, the front thunder whirlpool completely disappeared. No, it didn't disappear. It was still there. Gu Yongfeng could still see the thunder whirlpool in front of him, but he could not feel the connection. Only then did he realize that the thunder whirlpool in front of him was the one released by Kong Shinmu. "Kid, why do you have the thunder whirlpool secret technique?" This was the point that Gu Yongfeng could not understand at this time. Kong Shinmu, this kid, was a nobody. This secret technique of yours needs to be strengthened. After Kong Shinmu devoured the thunder whirlpool, he discovered the hidden dangers of the thunder whirlpool during the process of releasing it. If he released the thunder whirlpool according to Gu Yongfeng's method, the biggest drawback would be the center of the thunder whirlpool. If he encountered a stronger cultivator, he could cast a spell in the center of the thunder whirlpool and disintegrate it. Or he could use his supreme divine power to control the thunder whirlpool to achieve the purpose of reverse rotation. In this way, the thunder whirlpool would concentrate all the power in the periphery and rush to the caster. Kong Shinmu had just thought of this and missed a good opportunity. Fortunately, there were 2 other lightning whirlpools. Kong Shinmu did whatever he thought of. After absorbing the lightning vortex, Kong Shinmu's figure appeared in Gu Yongfeng's field of vision. However, before Gu Yongfeng could further control Kong Shinmu leaped into the opposite side of the mirror image. As soon as he entered, he did as he had planned. It was not difficult to control the lightning whirlpool. Just by relying on the supreme power of the soul, he could achieve his goal of control. Although his supreme soul power hadn't improved much since he had obtained it, it wasn't weak either. It remained at the 5th floor. Supreme soul power was different from other supreme divine powers. It was a supreme divine power that was closely related to one's soul and consciousness. With the power of the 5th level of the supreme soul and Kong Shinmu's current soul consciousness, he easily controlled the lightning whirlpool on the other side of the mirror image. Then, he cast a spell and reversed the flow of the lightning vortex. As expected, all the power in the center of the lightning vortex surged toward the periphery. The speed of the lightning vortex's rotation was proportional to the strength of the caster's spell. Kong Shinmu cast the spell, causing the lightning vortex's speed to reach an unprecedented height. Gu Yongfeng saw that the lightning vortex on the other side of the mirror image had lost control. But he had no choice but to use the 3rd lightning vortex to resist the power of the lightning vortex that had gone out of control. It was only then that Gu Yongfeng realized the extent of Jiang Shenwu's power. Looking at the spinning speed of the lightning vortex on the other side of the mirror image, Gu Yongfeng was shocked. Even at his peak, he hadn't reached such a height. Kong Shinmu reached it easily? Now, even though Gu Yongfeng had witnessed the strength of Kong Shinmu's control of the lightning vortex, he refused to believe that this was Kong Shinmu's true strength. In his eyes, Kong Shinmu was just a junior who had obtained some opportunities by chance. However, Gu Yongfeng tried his best, but still failed to use the 3rd lightning vortex to resist the attack of the lightning vortex on the other side of the mirror image. In a breath's time, the power of the lightning vortex controlled by Kong Shinmu had already attacked. Gu Yongfeng was astonished by how strong he was. In the end, Gu Yongfeng had to give up the 3rd lightning vortex. Even so,
he still couldn't resist the attack of the lightning vortex controlled by Kong Shin-mu. I told you, your lightning vortex has serious drawbacks. Kong Shin-mu glanced at Gu Yongfeng, who had been repelled, and sneered. This is impossible. Gu Yongfeng kept muttering, and finally, as if he had made up his mind, he suddenly stood up. He had been forced to this point by Kong Shin-mu, so he had no choice but to fight with him. Now, Gu Yongfeng could even think that the reason why he couldn't contact Feng Er was that she had been killed by Kong Shin-mu. And Hai Fan, who had been missing for a long time. Gu Yongfeng's eyes were red. The seals in his hands changed quickly, and finally detonated the third lightning vortex. At the same time, there was also his own supreme divine power. Is this your counterattack before you die? You are worse than them. After going through the lightning vortex, Kong Shin-mu roughly figured out Gu Yongfeng's real strength. Although his supreme divine power had reached the 8th level, or even the peak of the 8th level. But the power of the supreme fog was still inferior to the power of his supreme divine fire. What made Kong Shin-mu afraid was probably the moment when the power of the supreme fog combined with the lightning vortex. This was Gu Yongfeng's strength. Naturally, Kong Shin-mu would not allow him to release this move perfectly. Therefore, a long time ago, he had released the power of the Supreme Soul to block it. Boy, who do you think we are? Don't be too arrogant, or you won't even know when you will die. As soon as Gu Yongfeng's words fell, Kong Shin-mu's attack had already arrived. At the same time, Kong Shin-mu's figure had already approached. At this moment, Gu Yongfeng seemed to see a seal flash in Kong Shin-mu's eyes. That is a seal. It was the seal they were looking for. Seal. Gu Yongfeng wanted to shout this news, but he did not have the chance. Kong Shin-mu quickly ended Gu Yongfeng's life, and then flicked his sleeves and left. Emoya was a little surprised to see Kong Shin-mu walking over unscathed. After not seeing each other for a while, Kong Shin-mu's cultivation had improved a lot. In particular, after comprehending part of the power of the seal, his entire strength had reached a qualitative leap. Not bad. Emoya smiled gently. It's all thanks to the good opportunity created by Senior. Kong Shin-mu was grateful to Emoya from the bottom of his heart. His current strength was indeed inseparable from Emoya's company. After the two left, the battlefield became lively. No one would have thought that the insufferably arrogant elder Gu Yongfeng of the Everlasting Pavilion would be defeated by a nobody. According to their conversation just now, perhaps Gu Feng, whom the Everlasting Pavilion's eldest senior brother was looking for, was most likely dead. Chapter 57:20. The news that Gu Yongfeng had been defeated by an unknown person spread like wildfire. Those who entered the secret realm were all famous sects in the outer realm. Even the itinerant cultivators were all big shots with some reputation. Hearing this news, everyone was ready to watch a good show. Everyone wanted to know what the Everlasting Pavilion was going to do about this matter. In fact, the Everlasting Pavilion appeared to be quite calm. Only the great senior brother of the Everlasting Pavilion, Dan Yuanfei, was frantically searching for Gu Feng's whereabouts. As for whether Gu Yongfeng would be defeated or not, no one cared. The news about the star map lock was not a secret in the outer realm. On the contrary, all the cultivators who entered the secret realm knew about it. They also knew that the 4 great sects in the outer realm had a map of the location of the star map lock. They even knew the specific location of the star map lock. What did the star map lock mean? It was equivalent to a Dharma seal. Later, a piece of news spread in the secret realm that the star map lock was a kind of spatial Dharma seal. Regardless of who spread the news, the Star Atlas lock had become a must-have for all the cultivators who entered this place. Because of this, more and more cultivators gathered in the secret realm. Tang Xiaoyu was the first cultivator to discover the location of the Dharma seal. He immediately told the news to Kong Shin-mu. Kong Shin-mu successfully obtained the Dharma seal and comprehended it. Comprehending the Dharma seal meant that the star map lock no longer existed. Instead, it was in the form of a Dharma seal and belonged to Kong Shin-mu. Some cultivators went to the palace one after another. The palace that they saw this time was not as shabby as the one Kong Shin-mu had seen. Instead, it was in a new state. The new palace door was also open. They could still see the Dharma seal in the palace. For this reason, they used all their skills to compete for the Dharma seal in the palace. After defeating Gu Yongfeng,
Kong Shinmu and Emoya returned to the cave residence. As soon as the two of them arrived at the surface of the cave residence, they were shocked by the scene in front of them. The first time they went to the cave abode, they were chased underground by Gu Feng. Only then did they see the cave abode with the star map lock. The Immortals' Cave was located underground where they were currently standing. The cave abode was dozens of feet above the ground. At this moment, they saw the cave abode standing on the surface. The cave abode that he saw underground was the same as what he could see now. Even the array formation at the entrance of the cave abode was restored by some cultivators. Tsk tisk. Kong Shinmu sighed. The cultivators who came this time are really crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Moving the cave abode to the surface was a powerful move, but he did not expect that there would be an even more powerful move, which was to restore the formation at the entrance of the cave abode that he had destroyed. I can tell that he has not only unleashed his supreme divine power, but he has also unleashed some sort of secret technique. Emoya's beautiful eyes swept the abode before her as she spoke in a soft voice. It feels like the power of the Supreme Holy Land? The reason why Kong Shinmu was uncertain was that there were indeed traces of the power of the Supreme Holy Land, but it did not seem to be limited to this type of supreme divine power. There is the power of the Supreme Holy Land, but there should be two other types of supreme divine power. Emoya sized him up for a moment and said gently, 3 types of supreme divine power? Kong Shinmu was a little surprised. Emoya nodded. Kong Shinmu released his soul consciousness again to sense. The space around the cave abode seemed to have traces of distortion. Power of space? Could it be the power of supreme space? Although the passageway into this mystic realm contained many elements of the power of nature, he had devoured all of them. Now, there should be the power of nature in the passageway that contained the power of supreme space. Very similar. Even Emoya could sense the existence of the power of supreme space. Since the other party had unleashed the power of supreme space, he must have wielded the power of supreme space before it became a single supreme divine power. If that was the case, it was not surprising that this person possessed 3 types of supreme divine power. A cultivator of such strength could move the cave abode out, and even restore the formation at the entrance of the cave abode. It was most likely something that could be done easily. Then, here came the question. Was the star map lock still in the cave abode? Other than the power of the Supreme Holy Land and the power of supreme space, there was another type of supreme divine power that Kong Shinmu could not guess at the moment. If he did not sense it, why did he determine that there were 3 types of supreme divine power? Of course it was because of the seal. The seal tempered one's soul consciousness, and one's soul consciousness could sense traces of supreme divine power. He could sense the power of the Supreme Holy Land and the power of supreme space because he possessed these 2 types of supreme divine power. As for the third type, he could only sense traces of it being unleashed, but he could not determine it. Senior, what is the third type of supreme divine power? Since he could not think of it, he asked Emoya. The traces of the third type of supreme divine power are a little vague, so I am not very sure. However, we can determine it from the cave abode itself, Emoya said gently. Hearing that, Kong Shinmu sized up the cave abode again. The cave abode was exactly the same as the one he had seen for the first time. The formation had also been restored perfectly. On the surface, there did not seem to be any major problems. Wait a minute. Restored. A light bulb went off in Kong Shinmu's head. The formation at the entrance of the cave abode had been restored. Also, the appearance of this cave abode was exactly the same as the appearance when they had first entered the cave abode. It had been so long. Many cultivators should have found the cave abode and discovered the existence of the star map lock. Because of that, a battle was unavoidable. The cultivators who came here were all powerhouses with supreme divine power of level 5, or even level 6 and above. If they were to fight, the cave abode would definitely be destroyed. Now that the cave abode had appeared on the surface, it meant that the cave abode had been restored. Power of restoration? Kong Shinmu stated the conclusion that he had made based on his observations. It should be the power of restoration. Emoya analyzed and came to a conclusion. Supreme power of restoration? Kong Shinmu pondered about this supreme divine power. This is not a single supreme divine power. It is a type of multi-element supreme divine power, Emoya added. Senior. Kong Shinmu suddenly realized something serious. Hearing that, Emoya's beautiful eyes fell on Kong Shinmu. Do you still remember the 9 types of supreme divine power that I devoured from the Crimson Haze?
Kong Shinmu said.
Huh. Emoya knew what Kong Shinmu was going to say when she heard that word. Among the 9 types of supreme divine power, there is a supreme power of restoration?
Huh.
It seems a little different. Kong Shinmu sensed again and realized that among the 9 types of supreme divine power that he possessed, there was no supreme power of restoration.
It is the power of restoration.
Kong Shinmu confirmed again and said,
Supreme power of restoration?
Emoya's beautiful eyes lit up.
Yes. Kong Shinmu found it strange too.
Chapter 57:21. Supreme Regenerative Force restores the surface of the damaged object, while Supreme Regenerative Force restores the inner part of the damaged object. Emoya pondered for a moment according to her observation and said, the cave abode that appeared in front of them looked the same as before. It had obviously been restored. The formation guarding the entrance of the cave abode was indeed destroyed by Gufeng back then. Now that it appeared at the entrance of the cave abode intact, it had also been restored. At this time, there were also cultivators coming in one after another. Although the cultivators who came later were obstructed by the formation, the strength of the formation was obviously not as strong as when Kong Shinmu first opened it. In other words, the formation had only been restored. In other words, the other party was using Supreme Regenerative Force. Obviously, Supreme Regenerative Force could only restore the surface of the object, but not the inner part of the object. It was the same for the cave abode. The parts of the cave abode that were revealed to the cultivators had already been restored. But inside the cave abode, there were still some traces left by the cultivators who had gone through a battle. It had not been completely restored.
I see.
After listening to Emoya's explanation, Kong Shinmu had a rough understanding of the difference between Supreme Regenerative Force and Supreme Regenerative Force. In other words, he had Supreme Regenerative Force and could restore the inner part of the damaged object. If he comprehended Supreme Regenerative Force, didn't it mean that there was no such thing as injury? He could completely use Supreme Regenerative Force to heal his injuries. This was simply a kind of heaven-defying Supreme Regenerative Force. Kong Shinmu, although Supreme Regenerative Force can restore the inner part of the object, it can't heal by itself. Emoya knew what Kong Shinmu was thinking and could not help but chuckle.
Can't heal by itself?
Kong Shinmu could not hide the disappointment on his face. He suddenly felt that this Supreme Regenerative Force was not very useful. It's not that it can't heal by itself. If you reach a certain level you can heal by yourself.
Emoya said softly.
If the Supreme Regenerative Force reaches level 9, and you have an epiphany of the rules, you can use the mysterious power of the rules to achieve the goal of self-healing. Of course, there are other conditions.
Level 9? Conditions?
Kong Shinmu could not help but laugh when he heard this. He hadn't grasped the Supreme Recovery ability yet, so it was still too early to think about this. Once you grasp the Supreme Recovery ability, you will naturally slowly understand it, Emoya said. Kong Shinmu did not continue to dwell on the Supreme Regenerative ability. First, he had to solve the current situation. Since the cave had already been moved out, the Star Atlas Lock would also be moved out along with the cave.
Wait a minute.
No. Suddenly, Kong Shinmu thought of an extremely serious matter. The reason why they couldn't obtain the Star Atlas Lock was because the Star Atlas Lock was surrounded by the power of magic. Without dispelling the Dermic Might, he would not be able to take away the Star Atlas Lock. If the power of magic still existed on the Star Atlas Lock, even if the cave abode was moved out, the Star Atlas Lock should still be in its original position underground.
Senior!
Kong Shinmu called out to Emoya, and Emoya understood. The two of them took a detour around the cave and returned to the underground via the original route. After the cave was moved away, a bottomless pit appeared on the ground. Logically speaking, the Star Atlas Lock should exist somewhere in the pit, and it was very likely to be floating in the center of the pit. However, the two of them did not find the Star Atlas Lock. Kong Shinmu released his soul consciousness and extended it throughout the pit, but he could not find the Star Atlas Lock. Could it be that the Star Atlas Lock is also in the cave abode? Kong Shinmu did not dare to believe it. To move the Star Atlas Lock, one had to first crack the power of magic. Could it be that that person had cracked the power of magic? Let's go up and take a look, Emoya said. The two of them came to the surface again. More and more cultivators entered the cave abode, but from the beginning, there were only cultivators entering, and no cultivators coming out. Seeing this, Kong Shinmu could not help but be vigilant. Kong Shinmu, I keep feeling that there's something fishy going on. Emoya observed the cave abode, and even used her divine power to check it. The cave abode was still the original cave abode, but it gave off a very unfamiliar feeling. Senior, why don't you wait here? I'll go in and take a look first, Kong Shinmu said after thinking for a while. No, let's go together. Kong Shinmu was worried about Emoya, and Emoya was also worried about Kong Shinmu. The cultivator who moved the cave abode was an expert with 3 types of supreme divine power. It was really dangerous for Kong Shinmu to go in alone. But, before Kong Shinmu could finish his words, he saw a spear piercing over from the side. He hurriedly pulled Emoya and dashed to the side. The spear missed and stopped in mid-air. Immediately, a young man in a red and green silk robe dashed over from the side, holding a spear that flashed with green light. This person was dressed in fancy clothes, and the spear was not only green, but also flashed with other colors. However, the spear's handle was engraved with the mark of Everlasting Pavilion. He was sure that this person was from Everlasting Pavilion. You too. He Zhonghai glanced at Kong Shinmu, then his eyes fell on Emoya. The ferocious look on his face disappeared in an instant and was replaced by a flattering smile. I'm He Zhonghai, may I ask for your name? He Zhonghai stared straight at Emoya and grinned. Emoya was disgusted and ignored him. He Zhonghai didn't feel awkward at all. Instead he laughed and said, I like a reserved girl like you. Emoya still did not say anything. From the moment He Zhonghai's eyes fell on Emoya, Kong Shinmu's face did not look good. He stood in front of Emoya, protecting her behind him. It's a pity that such a beautiful flower is stuck in cow dung. He Zhonghai's attention finally fell on Kong Shinmu, and his words and actions showed his disdain for Kong Shinmu. Seeing Emoya closely following behind Kong Shinmu, he inexplicably developed a deep hostility for Kong Shinmu. If he killed this guy, he could get the beauty. He Zhonghai, who only wanted Emoya, completely forgot the purpose of this trip. Cow dung, do you dare to fight with me? He Zhonghai pointed the spear in his hand at Kong Shinmu and shouted. Kong Shinmu naturally would not pay attention to He Zhonghai. If he agreed, wouldn't it mean that he admitted that he was cow dung? The two glanced at He Zhonghai, then turned around and left. Stop. He Zhonghai obviously did not want to let the two go, especially since he did not want Emoya to leave with Kong Shinmu. If you don't have the guts to fight with me, then let go. Don't delay the girl. He Zhonghai's words made the passers-by laugh. Chapter 57-22. You don't even know the details. Don't pretend to be knowledgeable. He Zhonghai scolded coldly when he heard that. Ha ha. The crowd burst into laughter because of his words. There were 4 major sects in the outer region, and the Everlasting Pavilion was one of them. However, the people in the outer region basically only acknowledged the status of the Everlasting Pavilion on the surface. After all, the ancestors of the Everlasting Pavilion had established themselves earlier. The reason why the Everlasting Pavilion could become one of the 4 major sects was not because of their strength, but because they were the first to arrive. Of course, the fact that the Everlasting Pavilion could establish itself among the 4 major sects for thousands of years meant that the sect's foundation was strong enough. Among the 4 major sects, when some keywords were mentioned, they would think of the corresponding sect. For example, when the myriad origin superimposition technique was mentioned, it would be related to the Heaven Yuan Palace. But the Everlasting Pavilion was different. Each elder had a corresponding elder's secret technique, and each elder's secret technique was different, and it would not be passed on to the next generation. This kind of behavior was really confusing. When the Everlasting Pavilion was mentioned, most people in the outer region would unanimously think of a sentence. When a sect is big, there are all kinds of people. They were already used to He Zhonghai's behavior. Putting aside He Zhonghai's character, He Zhonghai looked decent, and his strength was also very strong. He was an outstanding young disciple. Unfortunately, this person was an infatuated person. He loved everyone he saw, and if he couldn't get them, he would destroy them. The girls that he had his eyes on never had a good ending. Everyone glanced at the girl that He Zhonghai had his eyes on, which was Emoya, and couldn't help but feel sympathy. This girl had an extraordinary temperament and a graceful figure, just like a pretty beauty that had entered the mortal world. She followed Kong Shin-mu, and other than being a little weak, everything else was not bad. This person. From the first time Kong Shin-mu saw He Zhonghai, he felt that this person was not a decent person. Sure enough, as soon as he opened his mouth, he revealed his true nature. Kong Shin-mu didn't want this kind of person to disturb Emoya, so he wanted to leave with Emoya. However, He Zhonghai didn't have any eyesight. He couldn't see Emoya's disdain for him, and Kong Shin-mu's hostility towards him, so he repeatedly stopped him. Kong Shin-mu. Emoya called out to Kong Shin-mu softly. Wait for me here, I'll go meet him, and then we'll go to the cave together. Kong Shin-mu couldn't take it anymore. This was the first time he had seen such a high-quality item. Miss, are you going there? I'll go with you. He Zhonghai looked at the cave and waved his hand. The door of the cave opened completely. The door was destroyed, but it did not reveal the interior of the cave. Moreover, no cultivators could be seen at the entrance of the cave. The cultivators who entered the cave abode seemed to have disappeared from the cave abode. There's a formation protecting this place, as well as the might of the Star Atlas Lock. It's extremely dangerous, He Zhonghai said lightly. Halfway through his words, he suddenly cast a spell at Kong Shin-mu, knocking Kong Shin-mu into the cave's entrance. Kong Shin-mu's mind was focused on the white figure that flashed at the entrance of the cave abode. He was not careful and fell into the trap. Emoya had been on guard against He Zhonghai. Seeing this scene, she protected Kong Shin-mu first and entered the cave abode with Kong Shin-mu. Cave abode. After Kong Shin-mu and Emoya entered, they found that the scene inside was the same as what they saw at the time. The only difference was the entrance of the cave abode. Standing in the cave abode, they couldn't see outside the cave abode. The scene that they saw was the scene inside the cave abode. Even the position of the entrance was the furnishings in the cave abode. The two of them tried and they could still pass through this place. Even so, they were still in the cave abode and did not leave the cave abode. Kong Shin-mu, this cave abode has really been modified by someone. Emoya sized up the situation in the cave abode and said in a deep voice. Yes, let's not separate from each other. Kong Shin-mu nodded. As soon as he said that, Kong Shin-mu's eyes fell on the place where they came in. A fierce look flashed in his eyes. Emoya looked at Kong Shin-mu with a puzzled expression. That brat is so arrogant. We have to teach him a lesson. Kong Shin-mu said calmly. After saying that, he formed a seal with both of his hands and pressed the space in front of him. Then, a door appeared in the space. The moment the door appeared, everything outside was revealed, including He Zhonghai who was about to enter. How did you do it? Emoya was a little surprised. Soon, she thought of how Kong Shin-mu did it. Dermic seal, Kong Shin-mu said. Kong Shin-mu used the power of the dermic seal and soon found the strange thing at the entrance of the cave abode. The cave abode had been moved to the ground by that mysterious cultivator. At most, he had restored everything in the cave abode to its original state. However, because of the Star Atlas Lock in the cave abode, he seemed to have moved the Star Atlas Lock up, so he would definitely activate the power of the Star Atlas Lock and produce all kinds of Dharma formations. Now, the door of the cave abode was a Dharma formation formed by the power of the Dharma formation. The thing that Kong Shin-mu was afraid of was the cultivator who had done all this. He was the one who had 3 types of supreme divine powers. The white figure that flashed by just now was most likely that cultivator. After Kong Shin-mu came in, he first released the supreme soul power. After ensuring that there were no problems in the surroundings, he began to release the power of the dermic seal. Kong Shin-mu activated the Dharma formation at the door of the cave abode and combined the power of the dermic seal to separate the space in the Dharma formation and the space at the entrance of the cave abode. After doing all that, He Zhonghai came in. The moment he entered, Kong Shin-mu activated the power of the dermic seal and sent He Zhonghai into the separated space. As for where the separated space would lead to, Kong Shin-mu didn't know and didn't want to care. Then, the two of them came to the place where the Star Atlas Lock was placed. The closer they got, the stronger the pressure they felt. In the end, the two of them released their supreme divine powers to resist the pressure and walked into the cave abode. The Star Atlas Lock was still there. Not only did it exist, but the pressure that permeated the surroundings was getting stronger. Obviously, the power of the Star Atlas Lock was still there. Perhaps it was because of the power of the Star Atlas Lock,
But there weren't many cultivators in the cave abode. Kong Shin-mu didn't hesitate. He gathered the power of the dermic seal and got closer to the Star Atlas lock. The closer he got to the Star Atlas lock, the clearer he could feel the power of the dermic seal. The repulsive power of the dermic seal was so strong that it made it difficult for Kong Shin-mu to even stand. He simply gathered the dermic seal again and released it. The dermic seal floated above the Star Atlas lock, stopped, and slowly rotated. At the same time, lines of words appeared on the Star Atlas lock. The densely packed words danced, and in an instant, they covered the entire cave abode. In the end, the words formed lines of lines, which looked like the dermic seal at first glance. The moment the pattern was formed, it fell on the dermic seal. When the two came into contact, Kong Shin-mu felt the power of the dermic seal surrounding the Star Atlas lock. Its essence was indeed the power of rule. The power of the dermic seal finally fell into the dermic seal, which could be considered as breaking the power of the Star Atlas lock. Chapter 57-23. Star Map Lock. It disappeared right in front of Kong Shin-mu and Emoya's eyes. "Senior, over there." Kong Shin-mu soon noticed a subtle change in the space next to him. He immediately brought Emoya to where the space was abnormal. Emoya's eyes curved, and a dangerous look flashed across her eyes. This person was interesting. He caught up with them so quickly and hid himself so well. 15 minutes later, Kong Shin-mu and Emoya arrived at a secret room. The two of them had been to this secret room before, and it did not seem to have changed much on the surface. When the two of them arrived, they roughly checked out the cave abode's current situation. The structure of the cave abode was basically the same as before, but it gave off the illusion that one could not leave the cave abode. Without a doubt, the mysterious cultivator had cast a corresponding spell on the cave abode when he moved it out. Kong Shin-mu could clearly sense traces of the Supreme Holy Land's power in the surroundings. As for the Supreme Space Power, he had only devoured the Supreme Space Power's power of nature. He had yet to comprehend it, so he could not unleash this power. However, he was certain that the entire cave abode was affected by the Supreme Space Power. Of course, the Supreme Restoration Power could not be ignored. That mysterious cultivator did not hesitate to expend such a supreme divine power to move the cave abode out. What exactly was his goal? To possess the Supreme Space Power, one must have an extraordinary background. For such a powerhouse to break the power on the star map lock, it would be a piece of cake. However, the reality was that the mysterious cultivator did not break the power on the star map lock. He did not even plan to take the star map lock away. This was something that Kong Shin-mu could not understand. Kong Shin-mu, you know about the other realm, right? Emoya looked around and realized that all the secret rooms and lounges around the cave abode had space barriers. Such a technique of space barriers reminded Emoya of the other realm. The dead spirit clan of the 4 ancestor corpse clans of the other realm appeared with the flame of dead spirits. It was said that when the flame of dead spirits reached a certain level, it could create space barriers. This kind of spatial barrier was different from ordinary spatial barriers. The flame of the undead spirits was a kind of flame power. Because it had existed among the dead spirit race for a long time, it had absorbed the local spirit veins of the dead spirit race and gradually evolved into a kind of existence similar to a supreme divine power. In other words, the flame of necromancy could evolve. Just like the supreme divine power, it could be continuously strengthened through continuous cultivation or actual combat. The flame of the undead spirits could also advance, but it was more difficult to do so. Not only did the flame of undead spirits have to devour the corresponding power, but the owner of the flame of undead spirits also had to have a certain level of divine power. If the two reached the same level, the flame of undead spirits could evolve. This level was infinitely close to the realm of laws. After the flame of the undead evolved, it would become a type of nomological power. In reality, this kind of power was above the supreme divine power, but it was inferior to the rule power. At that time, the flames of undead spirits would be able to create an undead barrier. The flame of undead spirits was the power of the undead spirit tribe from the other world. Under normal circumstances, the cultivators of this world could sign a contract with the living beings of the other world and bring them to this world if they had a summoning artifact of a higher level. When the dead spirit race of the 4 great corpse ancestor clans passed through the contract gate, if the flame of the undead spirits had the undead spirit barrier, it would gradually transform into a space barrier. This transformation process could be understood as an evolution after passing through the contract gate. Yes, I know.
When Moya mentioned the other world, the first thing that came to Kong Shinmu's mind was Flame of the Undead Spirits. For some reason, the Flame of the Undead Spirits had become active after entering the cave abode. The space barrier around this cave abode is the undead spirit barrier of the other world's Flame of the Undead Spirits, Moya said in a serious tone. Flame of the Undead Spirits? Kong Shinmu was a little confused. You can understand it this way. The Flame of the Undead Spirits is comparable to a supreme divine power. It's the same as the replication power of the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance that you came into contact with. Moya thought for a moment and said softly. Compared to supreme divine power, the Flame of the Undead Spirits will be similar to other supreme divine powers. When the cultivator's strength reaches a certain level, they will achieve the goal of advancing. When the Flame of the Undead Spirits reaches the 9th level, it will infinitely approach the power of the rule. At that time, the power of the barrier will be generated, which is equivalent to the rule. The power that is formed is the Undead Spirit Barrier. Kong Shinmu basically understood Moya's explanation. Senior, because the Flame of the Undead Spirits can only come to this world through the contract gate, the Undead Spirit Barrier that is formed will transform into a space barrier. Is that what you mean? Kong Shinmu immediately deduced the reason for the appearance of the space barrier in the cave abode. At the same time, he also understood why the Flame of the Undead Spirits would become active. That's right. Moya nodded. Senior, could it be that there is a space barrier in the cave abode, which causes the internal space pattern of the cave abode to change, creating an illusion that one can only enter but not exit? Kong Shinmu asked. You're right. However, it's not an illusion that one can only enter but not exit. It's the truth. Moya's beautiful eyes glanced straight ahead. There was an entrance to the space barrier right in front of them. Once one entered the entrance of the space barrier, one would be trapped in it and would be unable to get out of it. In other words, after entering the space barrier, one would fall into its own space and be lost within, unable to leave the cave abode. Even if a cultivator broke through the space barrier, they might not be able to return to the cave abode. That was the main reason why there were more and more cultivators entering the cave abode, but not many left. Senior, when Kong Shinmu realized the space barrier, he was suddenly worried about his and Moya's current situation. However, he soon realized that they did not enter the space barrier. According to the Flame of the Undead Spirits indication, there was an entrance that seemed to be a space barrier right in front of them. We didn't enter the space barrier, but we can't be careless because I realized that the space barrier will move at irregular intervals. Moya analyzed and said in a deep voice. The space barrier would move at irregular intervals, and if one was not careful, one would be sucked into it. I'm starting to not understand the purpose of that cultivator's actions. Kong Shinmu thought about it, but he still could not understand why the mysterious cultivator would do that. He had spent so much effort to move the cave abode to the surface, but his goal was not the star map lock. Since his goal was not the star map lock, what was the purpose of releasing the space barrier now? Could the other party be a member of the Undead Spirit Clan from the other world? Since he was a member of the Undead Spirit Clan, he must have contracted a Dharma artifact or someone related to it if he wanted to come to this world. Suddenly, Kong Shinmu clearly felt the flame of the undead spirits in his body move. The movement pointed to the back. Senior. Chapter 57-24. Just as the two of them moved away, the space where they were standing just now changed. Moya was powerful enough to sense that there was an extra layer of space. Kong Shinmu also sensed that there was an extra layer of space with the help of the Dharma seal. This feeling of the space layer reminded Kong Shinmu of the manifestation origin superposition technique. The extra space layer just now was one of the entrances of the space rampart that suddenly moved here. At the same time, the entrance of the space rampart in front of them also began to move slowly. The moment it moved, there was a slightly familiar aura coming from behind the rampart. It was He Zhonghai's aura. Zhang Shenwu raised his eyebrows. His figure moved and he swept over. He grabbed the space layer next to the space rampart, and with a sudden force, he pulled out a figure. It was He Zhonghai. Moya was not surprised to see He Zhonghai. Although Kong Shinmu had sent him to the space that was separated from the entrance of the cave abode, it was not the space rampart after all. For a disciple from a big sect like He Zhonghai, who had mastered all kinds of powerful techniques, it was only a matter of time before he left the separated space. It was just that she did not expect him to come out so quickly. Not only that, but he also concealed his aura and took advantage of the time when they were breaking the power of the Star Atlas lock to snatch the Star Atlas lock. Yo, you're not bad, kid. After being caught red-handed by Kong Shinmu, He Zhonghai said with a fake smile. As soon as he saw Mo Ya, he restrained his expression and tried to maintain his elegant demeanor. Miss, if you need the Star Atlas lock, I will give it to you. He Zhonghai's tone when talking to Mo Ya was completely different from how he talked to Kong Shinmu. Even his voice had changed. If one only listened to the voice, it would be impossible to imagine that it was the same person who spoke. You stay away from her. Kong Shinmu stood in front of He Zhonghai. The reason why he did not attack He Zhonghai immediately was that when Kong Shinmu pulled him out just now, he had sensed that this was just one of He Zhonghai's clones. This clone did not have the aura of the Star Atlas lock. If he wanted to find the main body, he would have to rely on this clone. This action of Kong Shinmu's cast He Zhonghai to take a yard after taking an inch. This one is currently discussing official matters with Miss. Please do not interrupt. He Zhonghai said indifferently as he shot a disdainful glance at Kong Shinmu. You! Kong Shinmu raised his brows and curled his palm into a fist. Dang! Without any hesitation, he punched He Zhonghai in the chest. He Zhonghai's body flew out and hit the wall in front of him. You brat! He Zhonghai didn't expect that Kong Shinmu would dare to attack him, and he was immediately enraged. Although this was only a clone, he was confident that he could defeat Kong Shinmu with just a clone. What he didn't expect was that after he was punched by Kong Shinmu didn't give him any chance to breathe and continued to attack. In a few breaths' time, He Zhonghai suffered dozens of punches from Kong Shinmu. Every punch contained Kong Shinmu's explosive Supreme Dragon Martial technique. Every punch hit the flesh, and every punch was fatal. Kong Shinmu only used a little bit of his supreme divine power to completely suppress the meridians of He Zhonghai's clone, making him unable to use his supreme divine power. He Zhonghai's face instantly darkened. However, he didn't even have a chance to speak before his life was cut off by Kong Shinmu. As long as it was his clone, whether it was alive or not, it wouldn't hinder him from finding the main body. Unfortunately, Kong Shinmu couldn't sense the aura of He Zhonghai's main body from this clone. Instead, he wasted some time here. Kong Shinmu can't find the main body's aura. Mo Ya hated He Zhonghai, but she knew the importance of the Star Atlas lock to Kong Shinmu, so she checked the situation of this clone, who knew that she couldn't use this clone to sense the main body's location. He Zhonghai must have abandoned this clone from the beginning. Not only that, but he also used a special method to block the aura emitted by the Star Atlas lock. This way, even if the Star Atlas lock's magic power was broken, others still wouldn't be able to sense the existence of the Star Atlas lock. It's okay. The seal can sense the Star Atlas lock's location. Kong Shinmu had already understood the power of the seal. This also meant that the Star Atlas lock seal belonged to Kong Shinmu. No matter where the Star Atlas lock was, Kong Shinmu could sense its location using the seal. Although they were delayed here for some time, Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya quickly caught up to He Zhonghai's main body. When he saw He Zhonghai, Kong Shinmu was shocked by He Zhonghai's strength again. The two of them watched him walk out of a space barrier as if nothing had happened. He Zhonghai was different from other cultivators. He wouldn't deliberately avoid space barriers. Instead, he could pass through them. His entire body was filled with a chilling aura. This aura was somewhat similar to Gu Yongfeng's lightning whirlpool. Miss, I've more or less figured out the situation here. Do you need me to bring you out? He Zhonghai was always humble and polite in front of Mo Ya. Mo Ya glanced at He Zhonghai indifferently and didn't say anything. No need. Kong Shinmu coldly rejected He Zhonghai. Who are you to the miss? When He Zhonghai faced Kong Shinmu, not only did his face turn gloomy, but the aura around him also suddenly turned cold. What do you think? Kong Shinmu raised his eyebrows and said indifferently. I don't care what your relationship with the miss was before. From now on, you and her will be separated from each other. When He Zhonghai finished speaking, he pressed his hand between his eyebrows. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The entire space began to tremble. An extremely oppressive aura was emitted from He Zhonghai's body. Kong Shinmu blocked this impact for Mo Ya. At the same time, he also sensed what this force was. This aura contained the power of replication. In other words, this was the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance. Looking at He Zhonghai again, he had already completed his previous action. The moment he moved his hand away, the space between his eyebrows was revealed. There was a blood-red mark between his eyebrows. The shape of the mark was oval. After having such a mark between his eyebrows, He Zhonghai's entire aura changed. Then with a wave of his hand, a white jade folding fan appeared in his hand. He Zhonghai opened the white jade folding fan and saw that there was an item on it. It was the Star Atlas lock. "I've underestimated you." He Zhonghai glanced at the Star Atlas lock on the white jade folding fan, then raised his eyes to look at Kong Shinmu. His eyes and brows were filled with hostility. "The magical seal has actually fallen into your hands." His tone suddenly became cold. The Star Atlas lock was a thorny item. That was why he had concealed its aura and wanted to take it away first. However, he had never thought that Kong Shinmu would still come looking for him. Not only that, but he had also interrupted his secret technique. Chapter 57-25. As Kong Shinmu operated the power of the seal, he could vaguely sense that there was a bit of dermic might within it. After breaking the dermic might on the Star Atlas lock, the dermic might disappeared, and then the Star Atlas lock was taken away by He Zhonghai. It was only now that Kong Shinmu noticed the dermic might. After the seal broke the dermic might, it integrated into the seal. In other words, the dermic might that accompanied the Star Atlas lock now belonged to him. As Kong Shinmu gathered the dermic might, he could feel an abnormally powerful force enter his soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness. This kind of power was somewhat similar to the Supreme Soul Power. The difference was that the Supreme Soul Power was a kind of spiritual type Supreme God Power. The dermic might, on the other hand, was comparable to the power of rules. To be exact, it was a kind of rules. Dermic might, as its name suggested, was the majestic power of law. Originally, law represented a broader meaning, but this was the Star Atlas lock's dermic might. Law also meant space. Mastering the Star Atlas lock's dermic might could achieve the goal of verbal law enforcement. In other words, as long as it was within the scope of one's ability, one could use the teleportation formation to reach the destination even if one didn't know where the place was. Now, Kong Shinmu had this power. Of course, to reach the realm of verbal law enforcement, one still needed to step into the door of rules. This aroused Kong Shinmu's fighting spirit towards rules. If a transcendent God realm cultivator wanted to reach the Supreme God realm, they needed to devour the existing Supreme God realm and comprehend the Supreme God realm to reach the Supreme God realm. After comprehending the Supreme God realm, one had to keep comprehending it and continue to advance to the Supreme God realm. To advance to the Supreme God realm, other than constantly strengthening one's soul and consciousness, one had to keep fighting. The so-called fighting, to put it simply, was to absorb the corresponding Supreme God realm and achieve the goal of advancing to the Supreme God realm. What couldn't be ignored was that in the boundless universe, every type of Supreme God realm could devour the corresponding power of nature. For example, the Supreme God realm's power of nature was all the power of fire that existed in the world. The power of the Supreme Divine Flame could devour the power of the flames in the natural world. After continuous refinement, it could increase the power of the Supreme Divine Flame. Kong Shinmu's unparalleled godly fire had already reached the 8th level. Previously, in the ancient desolate city, he had devoured several kinds of flame energy. At that time, the situation was more critical, so Kong Shinmu did not completely absorb them. At this moment, after the power of the Star Atlas lock was absorbed by the dermic seal, it became Kong Shinmu's own power. This power of magic drew in his soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness, causing the Supreme Divine Fire domain to suddenly spread out. Even the Supreme Divine Fire power began to circulate on its own. As the Supreme Divine Fire continued to circulate, all the fire energy it had absorbed earlier was refined and became a part of the Supreme Divine Fire. The unparalleled power of the Divine Flame, which had refined all the power of the flames, became even stronger. It was still actively operating, absorbing the surrounding flame power. The flame of the dead spirits within the extreme 10-directional devil seal was directly engulfed by the power of the Supreme Divine Fire. At this moment, the flame of the dead spirits had completely become the Supreme Divine Fire power. After devouring the flame of the dead spirits, the Supreme Divine Fire power had become stronger in nature, and its appearance had also changed. The flame of the dead spirits was now dark green, and the Supreme Divine Fire power had also turned dark green. In other words, it would be more appropriate to call the Supreme Divine Firepower the Supreme Divine Spirit Flame now. After the Supreme Divine Firepower had turned into the Supreme Divine Spirit Flame, it was slightly restrained. However, due to the influence of the surrounding space barrier, the Supreme Divine Spirit Flame did not stop and was still constantly circulating. It gave Kong Shinmu the feeling that the Supreme Divine Spirit Flame had formed layers of barriers. Kong Shinmu had mastered the power of magic, so he had a better understanding of the surrounding space, especially the surrounding space barrier. He could even clearly see every entrance of the surrounding space barrier, as well as the direction of the movement of the space barrier. With the Supreme Divine Spirit Flame, Kong Shinmu could determine that the person who had used the surrounding space barrier was not someone from the other world. It was more like someone had mastered the flame of the dead spirits and refined it to form a new type of power, which was how the space barrier was created. The refining method was the same as how he had refined the flame of the dead spirits. What Kong Shinmu was not sure about was whether the other party had the Supreme Divine Firepower. If the Supreme Divine Firepower had absorbed the flame of the dead spirits and created the space barrier, it would mean that the person had mastered 4 types of Supreme Divine Powers at the same time. This person's strength had far exceeded what Kong Shinmu had imagined. The white figure that flashed by at the entrance of the cave abode might have been the mysterious cultivator. The changes that had happened to the Supreme Divine Firepower in Kong Shinmu's body were naturally within He Zhonghai's sensing range. Although He Zhonghai was not sure what kind of firepower Kong Shinmu had absorbed, there was one thing that was clear, and that was that Kong Shinmu's Supreme Divine Firepower had changed. However, no matter how the Supreme Divine Firepower changed, it was just a diversified type of Supreme Divine Powers, which was nothing to be afraid of. Since you have a death wish, I'll grant you your wish. He Zhonghai's cold eyes were filled with murderous intent. He waved his white jade folding fan and his figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he was already next to Kong Shinmu. His speed was fast, but it was within Kong Shinmu's grasp. Although Kong Shinmu's reaction was fast, he was still a step slower than He Zhonghai. Emoya had been paying attention to He Zhonghai's every move since the beginning. Before He Zhonghai waved his white jade folding fan, Emoya circulated her Supreme Divine Powers and brought Kong Shinmu to the side immediately. When He Zhonghai's figure appeared, Emoya had already brought Kong Shinmu away from his attack. Emoya's action caused He Zhonghai's attack to miss, and it also made He Zhonghai develop a sense of reverence for Emoya. You're indeed the lady that I admire. He Zhonghai's eyes were cold, but there was an unconcealable smile on his face. When Emoya heard that, she retracted her gaze. She paid attention to He Zhonghai just now because she was afraid of his power, and not because of any other feelings. The aura of power that leaked out from He Zhonghai's body was very strange. Especially just now when his figure moved, whether it was the surrounding air or the surrounding space, there was no trace at all. Just like when Kong Shinmu had just cracked the power of magic on the Star Atlas lock, He Zhonghai had also suddenly appeared and snatched away the Star Atlas lock. He learned from others that every elder of the Everlasting Pavilion had a specific secret technique. Could it be that this He Zhonghai was also an elder of the Everlasting Pavilion and had some kind of mysterious secret technique? Kong Shinmu had lingering fears. The power that He Zhonghai displayed just now could also be classified as space-related. That was not Supreme Divine Powers, but it was even better than Supreme Divine Powers. Chapter 57-26. Miss, could you please step aside and let me deal with this troublemaker first? He Zhonghai's eyes were merciful to Emoya, but when he looked at Kong Shinmu, his eyes were filled with cold killing intent. Emoya naturally would not step aside. She even had the urge to take the initiative to get rid of He Zhonghai. Kong Shinmu protected Emoya tightly behind him. Even if he was not He Zhonghai's opponent, he had to protect Emoya. Moreover, this was only the strength that he had shown on the surface. No matter how strong an opponent was, there would be a certain flaw. Moreover, he had to get the star map lock back. He Zhonghai saw Kong Shinmu's action and thought that it was because Kong Shinmu was forcibly preventing Emoya from leaving, so he controlled his attack. It was not enough to hurt Emoya, but it was enough to deal a heavy blow to Kong Shinmu. However, he ignored Kong Shinmu's ability. Kong Shinmu seemed to be able to see his attack clearly and always avoided it one step ahead. You took away Gufeng's power? By now, He Zhonghai had already seen through it. Kong Shinmu could clearly see through his positional spell,
so he must have taken away Gufeng's power. He Zhonghai had 2 spells. One of them was the positional spell, Positional Vortex. It was a spell that used an array to create a vortex of power. The other was Phantom Vortex. As the name suggested, it was a movement spell. Just now, He Zhonghai used the Phantom Vortex secret spell to take away the star map lock from Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. Now, the secret spell that He Zhonghai used to deal with Kong Shinmu was the Positional Vortex. Kong Shinmu avoided the attack of the Positional Vortex so easily, so he could not help but think that Gufeng's power had already fallen into Kong Shinmu's hands. Back in the Wuji Pavilion, Gufeng had taken a fancy to the Positional Vortex secret spell, so she took it away and imprisoned it on the magic tool Bloodstain. The bloodstain itself was soaked in the power of the Crimson Flame Qilin's bloodline. Coupled with the Positional Vortex, its combat power soared. He Zhonghai had thought that Gufeng had disappeared to search for new treasures in the mystic realm. After all, Gufeng loved all the treasures in the arcane realm. Even if someone else had already dug them out, she still wanted to get her hands on them. Now, it seemed that Gufeng's disappearance was definitely related to this kid in front of him. You mean the bloodstains? Kong Shinmu did not avoid anything. He moved away and said calmly. The moment He Zhonghai unleashed the vortex field, Kong Shinmu sensed the nature of this secret technique. It was similar to the field spell released by Gufeng's Bloodscar. The only difference was that the two used different methods of release. After defeating Gufeng, although Kong Shinmu did not intend to refine the bloodstains, he still checked the hidden power within them. Naturally, Kong Shinmu had also learned a thing or two about the position-type spells in the Bloodscar. Now that he was facing He Zhonghai's formation whirlpool, he had the strength to resist it. Kong Shinmu's every move was within He Zhonghai's grasp. His reaction proved that Gufeng's disappearance was related to him. Where's Gufeng? He Zhonghai was on the other side of the secret realm. When he heard Dan Yuanfei's call, he rushed back. He did not know the details of what had happened here. When Kong Shinmu heard that, his eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not say anything. Not talking? Then you know where she is. Tell me, and I will spare your life. He Zhonghai believed that Gufeng was strong, and she had the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance. It would not be a problem for her to deal with a wandering cultivator like Kong Shinmu. Gufeng's disappearance could only be attributed to Kong Shinmu's opportunism. He did not defeat her with his real strength. The moment the two of them confronted each other, the surrounding space ramparts suddenly moved. Several entrances to the space ramparts rushed in this direction. They suddenly merged and expanded, forming a giant space rampart. It was not just this place. The other space ramparts in other places were also merging. In a few breaths, all the space ramparts in the entire cave had merged. In this way, the entire cave was enveloped by the space ramparts. The cave had become its own space. All the cultivators who came later would only be able to enter this new space. Moreover, this time, they could only enter and not leave. Only cultivators who had stepped into the Gate of Rules could use the power of rules to break through the shackles of the space ramparts. Only then could they leave. The essence of the space rampart was a rampart formed by the flame of the dead spirits. The dead spirits' rampart completely enveloped the entire cave. In other words, the entire cave was a kind of dead spirits rampart. Everywhere would emit the aura of the flame of the dead spirits. The power released by the dead spirits rampart on such a large scale caused the 8-god star plate to form a connection. The 8-god star plate began to shake. What is that thing? Soon, He Zhonghai discovered the 8-god star plate's aura. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu did not hold back. Since the 8-god star plate was connected to the surrounding space ramparts, he took out the 8-god star plate. Once the 8-god star plate appeared, it floated in the air, absorbing the aura of the dead spirits in the surrounding space. Star Devour. He Zhonghai recognized it. It was Hai Fan's summoning artifact, Star Devour. The cruel truth was already in front of him, so there was no need to say anything more. He Zhonghai did not hold back anymore. His first reaction was to gather his strength to retrieve the 8-god star plate. However, he did not expect that the 8-god star plate would reflect his strength. Everyone in the Everlasting Pavilion knew that Hai Fan had a summoning artifact, Star Devour, that could summon creatures from the other world. In the Everlasting Pavilion,
There were also some summoning artifacts that could summon creatures from the other world. Therefore, they did not know much about Star Devour. After touching it, He Zhonghai realized that Star Devour was actually the 8-god star plate. 8-god star plate. He Zhonghai said word by word. Star Devour was the artifact of the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion, so he had to get it back. Moreover, he had to get the 8-god star plate back. He Zhonghai glanced at Amoya and attacked again. This time, He Zhonghai released the Phantom Whirlpool secret technique. Kong Shinmu naturally could not capture He Zhonghai, who was using the Phantom Whirlpool secret technique. Just as he was about to condense the Dharma Seal and Dharma Power, he accidentally caught a glimpse of the 8-god star plate. The 8-god star plate took the initiative to attack. Although he could not see where He Zhonghai was, he could use the 8-god star plate to determine He Zhonghai's position. Moreover, no matter where He Zhonghai went, the 8-god star plate's attack would automatically follow. He Zhonghai never expected that his Phantom Whirlpool would be broken by the 8-god star plate. He was furious. The 8-god star plate could only be his. This made He Zhonghai even more determined to fight for the 8-god star plate. The 8-god star plate absorbed the breath of dead spirits in the surrounding space, and the entire artifact gradually returned to its original appearance. In time, as long as he found the lost base, this artifact could be considered the real 8-god star plate. After absorbing the breath of dead spirits around him, Kong Shinmu kept the 8-god star plate. He Zhonghai chased after him and got entangled with Kong Shinmu. The deterrence of their soul consciousness was very strong. When they collided with each other, it formed a barrier in the surrounding space, blocking everything from the outside world. Chapter 57-27. Inside the soul consciousness barrier, both He Zhonghai and Kong Shinmu were giving it their all. Hand over the 8-god star plate. He Zhonghai's eyes seemed to be covered by a layer of gray shadow. This layer of gray shadow kept changing as He Zhonghai spoke. Kong Shinmu could sense that this gray shadow was the Phantom Vortex secret technique. What He Zhonghai used just now was just the tip of the iceberg. He had not used the real Phantom Vortex yet, but he had used the Formation Vortex first. Kong Shinmu had already seen Gu Feng's formation technique, so he could make a simple solution to the Formation Vortex. However, as the gray shadow in He Zhonghai's eyes deepened, the surrounding Formation Vortex underwent a qualitative change. From the outside, it felt like the surrounding space had not changed at all, but was full of traps. As long as he moved slightly, he could trigger a chain attack from the Formation Vortex, and he would not be able to react in time. Kong Shinmu's guess was right. He could not move now. It was not just Kong Shinmu. If it were anyone else, no matter how strong the cultivator was, they would trigger the Formation Vortex secret technique if they entered the Formation Vortex. Once the Formation Vortex was triggered, they would not only face the restraints of the formation, but also the attacks from the Phantom Vortex. He Zhonghai's mastery of the Phantom Vortex had broken through the boundary. Not only could he use the secret technique with the Formation Vortex, but he could also use the Phantom Vortex as an offensive technique. Kong Shinmu did not move, but He Zhonghai would not let him get what he wanted. He Zhonghai controlled one of the formation bases and quickly approached Kong Shinmu. It seemed like he had moved the formation base, but in fact, he had moved the space where the formation base was. In other words, it was equivalent to Kong Shinmu moving his body. Kong Shinmu was constantly paying attention to the surrounding formation bases. When He Zhonghai controlled the formation base, Kong Shinmu wanted to kill He Zhonghai on the spot. If the conditions allowed, he would not hesitate to kill He Zhonghai. Brat, the 8-god star plate doesn't belong to you. Quickly hand it over before you die. He Zhonghai frowned and said coldly. What are you saying? Regardless of whether I am dead or alive, you want the 8-god star plate. Why do you need to ask so much? Kong Shinmu raised his eyebrows and said faintly. That's true. He Zhonghai coldly laughed and unleashed his unparalleled godly strength. For a moment, something like a spider web fell from the sky and trapped Kong Shinmu. Before the object even came close, Kong Shinmu could already feel the pressure coming from it. Moreover, as this thing approached, he could clearly sense that the power in his chi meridian was stagnating, and even flowing in reverse. This was He Zhonghai's supreme divine power, the supreme divine power that accompanied his supreme domain power. As a result, the moment this power poured out, even his soul and consciousness were affected.
Kong Shin-mu directly controlled the dermic seal and released the power of the dermic might. The moment the spider web came crashing down, Kong Shin-mu used the power of the dermic might. What surprised Kong Shin-mu was that after releasing the power of the dermic might, he did not teleport away as he had imagined. Instead, he was still standing in the same place. Seeing the spider web coming towards him, Kong Shin-mu once again gathered the power of the dermic might. At this moment, He Zhonghai's face was terrifyingly gloomy. The spider web had already reached him, but it directly penetrated Kong Shin-mu's body. No, it didn't penetrate. When the spider web passed by, Kong Shin-mu's body did not feel the slightest bit of discomfort. After focusing his mind to examine it again, Kong Shin-mu suddenly realized something. The power of the dermic might that he had used had brought him to a parallel space with the spider web, so its attack naturally missed. This scene caused He Zhonghai to be stunned. Was this the power of the dermic seal? Or the power of the dermic might? In the end, he had underestimated this brat. He Zhonghai's hand gestures changed rapidly, and the spider web in the space suddenly disappeared. Kaboom! Then, a series of explosions sounded in the space, followed by a gray aura that quickly filled the space. Being in a parallel space, Kong Shin-mu could also feel the pressure brought by this gray aura. Moreover, when this gray aura approached him, it was obvious that the space was being eroded. You've only grasped a little bit of it. Do you really think this will save your life? He Zhonghai grinned hideously. His figure had already arrived at Kong Shin-mu's side, and a swift and fierce palm attack followed. The palm attack carried a strong gust of wind, which was the supreme wind force. Including the gray aura that permeated the palm attack, it was the supreme thunder force. Just by looking at the gray aura, it was difficult to associate it with the thunder attribute. Moreover, this gray aura also had an extremely strong corrosive ability, which was a far cry from the thunder attribute. However, when Kong Shin-mu faced this power, it was obvious that it had the thunder attribute. He had come into contact with the supreme thunder force in the past, so he was not unfamiliar with the supreme thunder force. The reason why He Zhonghai's supreme thunder force looked like this was most likely due to the influence of his secret skill. The combination of the formation vortex and the phantom vortex could enhance the supreme divine power to a certain extent. It was extremely unwise to fight head-on knowing that he could not win, so Kong Shin-mu decisively chose to retreat. After a few rounds, He Zhonghai's expression became even uglier. Kong Shin-mu was no match for him at all, but it was true that he could not catch Kong Shin-mu's figure. There were a few times when he was about to catch Kong Shin-mu, but Kong Shin-mu was always able to dodge at the crucial moment by relying on the power of the dermic seal. Do you only know how to run? He Zhonghai's phantom vortex was a movement type of secret skill. When this secret skill was mastered, it could also allow one to travel freely in the corresponding space. He Zhonghai possessed the supreme thunder force and the supreme wind force. Combining these two types of supreme divine power, he could even be unafraid of space storms. He Zhonghai had already mastered the phantom vortex long ago, so it was naturally not a problem for him to deal with some superficial space techniques of Kong Shin-mu. However, he was unable to use the power of the phantom vortex in this place. At this moment, the cave abode had already been covered by the space rampart. It was equivalent to the evolved space rampart becoming the boundary of the cave abode. Under the effect of the evolved space rampart, the cave abode had become a self-contained space that could only be entered and not exited. Before the space rampart had fully evolved, some cultivators with powerful cultivation could still leave the cave abode. Now that the space rampart had fully evolved, even a cultivator with level 9 supreme divine power might not be able to leave. He Zhonghai's supreme divine power had already reached level 9 and was infinitely close to the Gate of Rules. When he used his supreme divine power, he could feel the pressure brought by the space rampart. This was also why he could not use the phantom vortex secret skill. With this kind of pressure, all the cultivators here would be restricted in all aspects. When He Zhonghai realized this, he also thought that Kong Shin-mu would be pressured. However, after a round of teaching, He Zhonghai began to doubt his previous speculation. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.